Well, it feels like it has been forever. So I'm excited to share today's video message, and I want to start by telling you all that I'm starting something new on my channel. I'm just going to experiment with it and see where it goes. I've started some new goals for the new year, and as I've been sharing little things here and there on Facebook and Instagram, I've had lots of people reaching out to me and asking me if I'll share more. I've had people say, hey, will you teach classes on this? Will you write a book about it? Anyways, it's taken a lot of time to respond to every single person, so I came up with an easier solution, and I thought, why don't I just make some short videos, a couple a month, where I share what it is that I've been doing. You know, our family vlog is called Around the House, but I think these short videos will fit that description a lot better because I'll be taking you around my house and giving you an inside look into how I'm going about accomplishing my goals. I just think that will save me a lot of time. There seems to be enough requests for that, so I'm gonna go ahead and give that a try and we'll see what happens. So stay tuned for those videos here on my channel. So 2020 is the year of perfect vision, and I have a new vision for myself and my life. So I'm going to share with you some of those goals and my plan for achieving them. I'm just going to give you a little bit of a summary. These aren't in any particular order, but I have go to bed by 10:30 every night. That's a really hard one for me. And I've been able to do it for the most part, except for these last 2 nights. And that's because I have so much going on this week. It's my son's Eagle Court of Honor this Saturday, and I just feel like I have so much to do to get ready for that. I feel like we've had a million appointments this week between all the kids, and I just feel like there's somewhere I always have to be. So I don't have a lot of time to get the things done that I need to during the day, so that ends up happening at night after the kids go to bed. So I am working harder at that one. I have on here read an hour each day, books, church history, all of that. I'm able to do that better when I'm waiting in the car for my kids while they're at their lessons. So I'd like to do that more, and I think after this week I will be able to. Study the scriptures for at least 30 minutes a day. So not just reading them, but studying them. Write more in my journal. Study the restoration. I've been doing that. More prayer, more silence, and just listening. I have on here bubble baths. On a day like today, that actually sounds pretty good. It's kind of a dark, dreary, dismal day today. I feel like there's not a lot of light coming through the windows and it's pretty dark outside. More fresh air and sun. I have been doing that. I want to add more good music to my music collection. Go to the temple more. We want to try to go at least once a week. And now that my daughter just moved into Young Women's, she gets to go for the first time this week, so we're all excited about that. More fasting, listening to the church podcasts on LDS.org, more uplifting videos and movies on the weekends. And one of the best ones of all that I have been doing is going to bed with a clean kitchen. Because I'll tell you what, when you wake up to a clean kitchen, you just feel like you can conquer your whole day. It just gives you so much more time. And I think the majority of last year, I spent my mornings cleaning the kitchen. It would take me 2 hours, and then by the time I was done, it was time to go get my son from kindergarten, and then the rest of the day just felt like it was lost. So this way, I wake up feeling like the house is clean, I can do things that I need to do. So that's a big one for me. So anyways, I've kind of given myself a daily schedule that I've tried to follow, and I'll share that more in my shorter videos that I talked about, so stay tuned for that. Anyways, 2020 is a new vision for me. I just feel such motivation and drive to share and inspire and uplift and encourage in so many areas of life, but especially spiritually. I just want to do all that I can to draw even nearer to the Lord and to engage more in the work. But you guys, I cannot believe how many things have happened since the last video message. I mean, there are so many things. And right now, any minute, the president is supposed to address the nation right now regarding Iran. I just received a text from my mom that my grandma, her mom, is in the hospital, about to pass away right now over in Tennessee. So I've been trying to keep her in my thoughts and prayers this morning. I've had other family members in the hospital over the last month, my mother-in-law, my uncle. There were a lot of people who passed away in December. Oh, and it's snowing right now. It just started to snow. But right after the last video, in order, the President of the United States was impeached by the House. That was just within a few days after my last video. We've had Australia on fire. The US Embassy was attacked. And America responded by killing their top general. And now there's a lot of tension, especially here in the United States. You have the Democrats who really loathe the president, and they're not doing a whole lot to help unite everyone together. And it's interesting to think about American history when you look at the past and all the times that America has been attacked, whether on our own soil or in foreign lands. That's usually something that unites the American people and brings us together for a common cause of a love for one another, of a love for fellow Americans and wanting to protect them. But in this unique instance, we see this party of people that have so much hatred towards the President of the United States that they're willing to side with Iran. They see America as the bad guy, and that's the message that's being spread throughout the media, throughout Hollywood, throughout the Democratic Party, and it's creating even more of a division here in the United States. And we're going to talk about that more a little bit later on in the video. But clearly, it's obvious that Satan is doing all that he can right now to prevent God's plans for 2020. Clearly, he knows that God has something big in store for this year, and he's going to do all he can to interfere with that. These things are all so distracting that it's pulling people away from focusing on the Lord and what he's doing and his plans, and the fact that our Savior Jesus Christ is returning very soon. I mean, that should be our focus. That should be what drives us right now in all of our decisions, priorities, and choices. Anyways, there has been so much going on, and I know there's a lot of you who want me to address that big elephant in the room, that big story. You know what I'm talking about. And I will, but before I get to that, I want to revisit some things about 2019 and then talk a little bit about 2020. So in 2019, I talked about that being the year of wolves in sheep's clothing being exposed. And that's exactly what happened last year. All year long, up until the very last month of the year, it was just story after story after story of people blowing the whistle on all kinds of people, groups, organizations, bringing them into the light and showing us who they really are. I mean, we've had that happening in the media, in Hollywood, in politics, but I said last year that this would also happen within the churches, and we've been seeing members of our own church having gone so far off the path that many have described it as they've fallen off the edge. Between October and December, this just has been the topic of conversation in all of my video messages because of what I was seeing happening with my own eyes and seeing people that I personally know following these leaders and groups and organizations and people. And so I felt like I had to say something. Now with recent events in the news, it speaks for itself. I don't think I have to say much more about this after today's video message, but we're gonna get to the biggest story of all that just happened at the end of the year in just a minute. Before that, I just wanna say that it feels like the Lord is cleaning out house. It feels like he's really separating the tares and exposing the wolves and the money changers so that he can do amazing things in this new year, in the year 2020. He needs us fully committed to him and on the covenant path. He needs pure and humble hearts to do his work. And so all these other people and groups and organizations that are not who they say they are, that are distracting so many people and causing a lot of confusion, he's allowed them to be exposed for who they really are so that we can pull back, redirect our focus back to what's important, back to what we should be doing, which is staying on that covenant path with our Savior Jesus Christ as the focal point, as well as the words of his prophet and apostles. But he needs us in that place so that he can use us. He needs us all in our proper places, just like a chessboard, right? As saints and members of his church, we are spread all over the world, and he needs us standing in those holy places. He needs us where he needs us so that when he unveils his perfect vision and what he has in store next, we'll be ready so that he can use us. But I believe something really awesome is on the horizon, and we're going to talk about that a little later on in this video. So before we get to all the good stuff, let's finally address that elephant in the room. Okay, let me start with a little bit of a backstory. So in my last video message, if you'll remember, I talked about my very first publisher and some concerns that I had about an author that he was promoting. Now, I left out names, including the name of my publisher, but the way I described that experience that I shared, some of you reached out to me after that video and said, I know exactly what you're talking about and who you're talking about because I was there and I felt the exact same way that you did. I concluded the same things that you did. After that day, I walked away from it all. But in that part of the video, I was talking about the red flags that we need to be aware of so that we're not deceived. And I put out a caution that we need to be so careful who we choose to follow, promote, and support. Now I want to go even further back into the backstory and let you know that after 1 year into my publishing contract with that publisher, he filed for bankruptcy and I was able to pull out and buy back all the rights to my very first book. But I remember it was a really unpleasant experience. I had a lot of unpleasant conversations and things that sort of happened along the way that led up to that point. And I was really disappointed in my overall experience with that publisher. But it all ended up working out. Now what's strange is I seldom ever, I don't know if I've even ever mentioned my publisher before in any of my video messages. So for me to bring him up and bring up that experience in the last video message, I mean, what are the odds? Because he ended up making world headlines just 2 weeks after I published that video. So anyways, let me take you to that night. It was during the holiday break. I was out with my family. It was one of those days where we were just everywhere, going to family parties, running errands, and that night my phone started to blow up. But I didn't have a chance to look at it. I just saw that I was getting text after text after text, and Facebook messages, people reaching out to me directly and tagging me on things. It was just, my phone just kept lighting up and ding, 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 ding. So I had to silence it, but I never had a chance to see what was going on until that night after I put the kids to bed and I finally had some time to unwind. I finally pulled up my phone and started going through all those messages and saw what was going on. Because those of you who figured it out and made that connection and knew who my publisher was, you knew that he was also the man in the story that I was being tagged in. So people were basically saying, look, Lindsay, have you heard about today's headline? Because I think you'll be really interested to know about it, especially with what you just shared in your last video message. I mean, what are the odds of the timing of that? So before I get to the story, for those of you who have been out of the loop or a little bit in the dark and you don't know what I'm talking about, I will get to the story. But I just want to add that instantly, the story was all over social media. I mean, everywhere I went for the following days and weeks, that's the story that I always saw. Now, I had said in my last video message, as I was talking about all of these people and groups again and bringing up these red flags to look for again, I mentioned that all these things I've been discovering reminds me of an NBC Dateline episode or a 2020 special. And so I had messaged that to some friends as well. And one of them responded and said, interesting that you said a 2020 special, considering the year that we're going into, 2020. Just a reminder that all of these wolves in sheep's clothing are being exposed by the end of the year to prepare for that new perfect vision for 2020. Okay, so let's get to this story. Let me just sum it up really quick. I'm not going to go into all the details, so I'll have some links down below. If you want to click on them, you can read more about it. But basically what happened is my former publisher, Chad Daybell, and his new wife are two people that the FBI are looking for right now. Just to lay out a brief timeline, Chad was a part of quite a few groups and would go to events and speak about the last days. I mean, the couple times that I met him personally, that was always his focus. He wrote books about it. It was his passion. He would always talk about the last days and what was coming. And he wrote fiction novels based on the events of the last days. I remember him talking with me one time and telling me about the time that he used to work in a cemetery and all the strange things that would happen to them there. And I noticed that he had this fascination for the supernatural and things beyond the veil, things pertaining to the end of the world. Well, anyways, after the last video message, some friends of mine asked me, how did this all start? Where did this fixation come from of all these people that share these similar patterns of being obsessed with the last days and dreams and visions, a call out, all of these prophecies, all of that. So people were starting to wonder, where did this all start? And I shared with them, I'm going to keep it anonymous, but I shared with them my first introduction to it was back in the mid 2000s, around 2007, 2008, 2009. There was a man who started an organization and he wrote some books, and he would go around and speak at workshops and seminars talking about dreams and visions and things of the last days. I remember buying one of his books and reading it, and it just talked about how pretty much anybody who had a dream or some type of a vision about the last days, their dream and their vision went in that book. So it was just random people, random dreams and visions from random members of the church who they would run into at firesides or other events, and they would just collect all these random dreams and visions and put them in a book. And then it sort of created this cult following. People just got hooked on that book and hooked on that concept of dreams and visions of the last days, and from there it just sort of expanded. From there, other groups broke off, and this pattern just started to form of people realizing that so many people were drawn to this and being pulled to this. And a lot of these groups started charging money for this and saying, if you want to join our group and hear about the dreams and visions that we're sharing and that we're discovering, you need to subscribe to our organization. And there's a monthly fee. You have to have a username and a password. And so a lot of people started making money off of this. And then from there, other people wrote other books. And then that's when people started really exploring spiritual gifts. And they started going down different paths and seeking out different supernatural experiences however they could. And this is when you had a lot of people opening up to any sort of doctrine or philosophy that was presented by anyone at any of these events, groups, conferences. People just would share whatever, and everyone would accept it as truth. And then from there, people started wanting their own experiences. So they started going out and seeking after their own supernatural experiences and gifts. And from there, from what I've pieced together, from what I've witnessed and people that I know, people earnestly sought messengers from heaven, however they could, wherever they could. And this is when people started taking temple ordinances and their temple clothing outside of the temple and performing these ordinances in their homes, in the woods, with other groups of people. This is when people started building altars in their homes, and they started getting visited by messengers who told them, you don't need to test me out. You don't need to shake my hand because we've moved beyond that. We're moving into the millennium now. We're beyond that. You've passed the test. You've proven true and faithful, and we're going to use you to gather in the 144,000, usher in the millennium. We're going to use you. And so all these people everywhere are feeling super important, super special. I've been chosen. Whether some spirit messenger has told me that myself, or my friends and people from these other groups have been visited by messengers who told them that I'm to be a part of this. Now from there was even more of a pattern. From there, these messengers were telling these people, look, if your spouse is not on board with you and doesn't support you in all these things that you're learning and doing, you need to leave them. They are dangerous to your mission. And a lot of these people would start to develop a relationship with people of the opposite gender in these groups and organizations. And at that point, there were a lot of people who started leaving their husbands and wives and either choosing to remain single or marrying other men and women from these groups who were also leaving their husbands and wives. I mean, this was just prevalent. I don't think people realize the scale of this, the magnitude that it reached. But this was a common thing. I have heard story after story after story. I've observed it myself. I've talked to people myself who are still a part of these groups and organizations and still fully support them and believe all of this. So clearly you can see the author of all of this. All of these groups and organizations that seem to be all throughout Utah and Idaho are all kind of doing this same thing. They might be going about it a little bit differently, but they're all connected. They all share common beliefs. And we talked about a lot of those red flags in my past video messages between October and December. But a lot of those they're preaching multiple probations. They're preaching that false doctrine that they have had multiple lives on the earth before. Pretty much reincarnation. And a lot of these people truly, truly believe that they were someone very prominent in a past life, whether it was a past prophet or the wife of a prophet or the mother of a prophet. They believe that they were someone very important and very special, and that they were saved to be here in the very last day to do some very important work, to be on some very important errand for the Lord, some very important mission that they must do anything and everything possible to succeed at. Even if that means leave your husband, leave your wife, leave your children, allow your family to be destroyed. It doesn't matter to them because they believe that they're someone else. They believe that when they pass away, they'll go back to being that prophet or that prophet's wife, and that's their real family. And it's just so bizarre. It really is just so nuts. But they are so passionate about this. They believe this so much that they're willing to do anything, even if it takes away the life of another. That's the pattern that we've been seeing. So yes, a lot of these groups are dangerous, and it's because these doctrines and philosophies are dangerous. And personally, I believe that after so many years of preaching doom and gloom and destruction and judgments coming, and every morning people still wake up, they still get in their car and go to work, the kids still go to school, the world still turns, people continue to celebrate birthdays and Christmas, and the economy does well. I think it takes a toll on these people who just want to see those prophecies fulfilled. They want to see that judgment and destruction happen. They want to see that because that's all they've been preaching. They have this infatuation, this obsession with it. And so it's almost as though they start to bring to pass their own drama. They start to create their own troubles, their own trials and challenges and drama, so that they can go into mission mode and they can do what it was they were sent here to do. That's what I've observed. That's how I feel. I feel that a lot of these people, whether intentional or not, they've created their own major problems so that something could finally happen and they could finally jump into that fight or flight mode and carry out their mission and feel needed and valued and important. Anyway, so a lot of people in these groups have been doing drastic things such as moving, leaving their homes, leaving their families, moving to the desert, moving to the mountains, setting up communities there. But anyways, back to the story with Chad Daybell. He had been a part of all of this and affiliated with a lot of these groups. And from what's being reported right now, from what's been coming out since the story was first brought into the light, is that he met a woman, Lori Vallow, I don't know if that's how you say her name, but they met, and she was a fan of his books. She got hooked on his books, and she had an interesting past. She had been through husband after husband after husband. From what I've read, they were the ones that filed for divorce from her. And so she had a few kids, one that was adopted from her brother and a daughter that lived with her. She was very much drawn into these groups and organizations, but she became a fan of Chad's books and connected with him that way, and then started doing podcasts with him where they would talk about things pertaining to the end of the world and all of this doom and gloom and all of that, dreams and visions, and started to create more of a following, and they started spending a lot of time together. And it sounds like Chad's wife maybe wasn't so much on that same page or fully committed to those things. She wasn't always a part of it. I know they ran the publishing company together. I know she's the one who edited my book, so I corresponded with her a little bit. But anyways, suddenly in October, she passes away in her sleep. They said it was really odd because she was so healthy. She had nothing wrong with her, and then she dies in her sleep. And then 2 weeks later, Chad marries his friend Lori. Within just a couple months of this time period, her ex-husband was killed by her brother. They're saying it was self-defense, but from what I understand, she was there, her brother was there, kids might have been there. Anyways, then she marries Chad, and then her children disappear. So concerned family members put in for a welfare check, and the police show up, and they don't have a warrant, so they can't come in and search. But Chad and Lori say that the kids are staying with friends in another state, and when they can't verify that, the police can't verify that, they realize something is very wrong and suspicious. So they go and get the warrant, and when they come back, the home has been suddenly vacated, and Chad and Lori have disappeared, and still as of right now, we're not sure where they are. According to their attorney, he's in contact with them and they are alive and the children are fine and well. But because they're not cooperating with law enforcement, those have been major red flags, and the media has been eating that up. And this story has made world headlines overnight. Now, I left out a lot of the details, but as more and more has been coming in, it's just this crazy web of mess that has been happening over the last couple years leading up to this craziness. And I do want to say that when I first heard about this story and I commented about it on Facebook, a lady in my ward reached out to me and said, you know what? I used to live in the same ward with Chad Daybell and his wife. And it was several years ago. And I remember going to girls' camp with his wife. We both served together. She would always talk about her husband and say, oh, he has these amazing spiritual gifts. He's had them forever, and he can do so many amazing things. He has all these encounters and experiences from beyond the veil, but he has these gifts. And she said the gifts that she described, I had never heard of before, and they were really unusual. And it kind of was a red flag for me. And so I responded back to her and said, by any chance, was he channeling spirits from the other side and saying they were former prophets and leaders and whatnot? And she wrote back and she said, yes. How did you know that? And I said, well, I just figured, because that's a common pattern I've been seeing and talking about in my videos of all of these groups, is they have this gift where they channel, just like Abraham Hicks and the Course for Miracles people, where they allow entities to enter into their body and speak through them. So they'll go into this meditative state, and then other energy, spirits, whatever they call it, enters into their body, and suddenly, you know, their eyes change, their mannerisms change, their voice changes, suddenly their voice is deep and they're a man. Or if they're a man, suddenly their voice is higher and they're a woman, and there's a woman speaking through them, and it's the mother of Jesus, Joan of Arc, you know, people like that, people throughout history. And what we're seeing here is those familiar spirits and those deceptive spirits who are working through these people to bring about the plans of the enemy. He is the author of all of this chaos and confusion. We can clearly see his print on all of this. It's doing so much right now to destroy families. I mean, you can see the fruits of this work. It's destroying families. It's destroying lives. There isn't anything good coming out of this. But so many people are following these groups and are deceived by all of this and thinking, no, these people have just been misunderstood. Their gifts are just misunderstood. And all the people who don't believe in their gifts and believe in this work that they're doing, it's because they're not ready. Their eyes haven't been opened. They're not awake. But we, however, we are spiritually awake. Our eyes have been opened. We are ready for further light and knowledge, and that's why we're being directed down these paths, and we're being used to gather in the 144,000 and all play a special and unique role in these last days. I mean, that's what they believe. And they are dead set in those beliefs. I do have some friends who still follow me and still watch my videos, and they still are a part of these groups and they still believe all of this. There are also people who used to follow my videos, but back in October when I came out and started exposing all of this, blowing the whistle on all of these groups and people, a lot of those people were very upset with that, and they began to attack me, especially all over social media, and tagging my name in their attacks, messaging me relentlessly and sending me emails. And I just felt I needed to just turn the other cheek and not respond. And so I didn't. And so to this day, I don't respond, but they still reach out to me and message me and tag me in their criticisms. But these very same people who continue to do that support these groups and support Chad, and they're defending him. And you can see it in conversations happening all over social media. Wherever a story pops up or a conversation pops up, I will see these people, these same people in those conversations, attacking other people and saying, you don't know what you're talking about. You don't really know Chad the way I do. He's a good person. This is all a big misunderstanding. It will all work out. You'll see. And just trying to continually justify what's been going on. And it's just crazy to see that no matter what happens, they just will never see the light. Or if they have, admit to it and admit that, yeah, maybe I have been deceived. Maybe I've been following the wrong people, the wrong crowd, the wrong groups. And that's okay, because I can correct my course, right? But instead of seeing this as an opportunity to see truth and correct error, it's almost as though they have a great sense of pride and they don't want to admit that maybe I was wrong, maybe I've been deceived, maybe I shouldn't be going down these paths and supporting and promoting these people. It's almost as though they're willing to go to the grave in full support of these people and their causes. But what that showed me, what that confirmed to me, was the real spirit that they are following, the spirit that's influencing them. And I mean, not only can you see it, you can feel it. You can feel it in all the contention and that constant need to defend and attack and defend and attack. You can see that they're following that spirit of deception, that spirit of deception is guiding them in all of their choices and decisions and what path to follow. That is the spirit that is influencing their life right now. But yes, back in October when this first started to happen, when I first started to stir up the hornet's nest, right? When I first started to blow that whistle and share with you all what I had seen myself, these patterns that I've been seeing happening all around me. I remember one particular woman who I really, really admired. She was a friend of mine. She had taken me out to lunch once, someone who I really respected and admired, and she's a popular Time Out for Women speaker. And I remember she went into one of these conversations where these other ladies were attacking me and my message and constantly tagging me, but I wasn't responding. And it was very personal attacks, very heated attacks, very unkind words. And this woman who I admired commented, and she referred to me as someone who was very ignorant. And she expressed her unhappiness with me as well. And I remember the way that felt when I read that. And I just thought, wow, this whole experience is really showing me people's true colors and who they really are on the inside. And I just started to see all these people and these groups who had this commonality of sort of building their own brand and bringing in money and being hungry for the spotlight and having lots of followers. And it's all about how many events you can speak at and podcasts that you can be on, books that you can sell, programs that you can sell, subscriptions that you can sign people up for. It's all about bringing in those income sources, being someone of major credibility. I mean, it was heart-sinking to hear this and to watch this, but at the same time, I was learning who people really were and what was really in their hearts, and more importantly, what spirit they were being influenced by. It was very eye-opening. So anybody who's raising alarm bells about these groups and organizations, and especially about Chad Daybell and his wife Lori, anyone who's raising alarm bells about that, which is a lot of people, right? These other people are attacking them and coming against them. They are so blinded by the spirit of deception that they can't even fathom that the people that they have followed and loved and adored and admired and had been mentored by and promoted, that these people did go way off the path and have led others with them and continue to do so. Oftentimes there is a pride factor when deception is brought into the spotlight and people are put on the spot and they feel pressured to respond. There is that sense of pride and that shock that goes through them that how could this be? I refuse to believe it. I'm in denial. They get angry. But really, they don't want to face the reality that maybe they have been on the wrong path. But I just see these patterns that they can't let it go. They become contentious. They begin to stir up contention all over social media. And that's a sign right there of the spirit that they are following and the spirit that's influencing all of this. That same author of deception. Chaos and confusion. So it was the same with Chad. He was a part of an organization where they were charging money. You had to be a subscriber so that the things that they discussed in those groups were private and other people couldn't have access to that information and knowledge unless they were in those groups and paying those fees. You know, and I think after a while they start to see, wow, there's enough people out there who are willing to pay money to hear more of this, and they're hungry for this. This is what they want. They're passionate for it, and they're really seeking this out. So the more books we write about this, the more conferences we speak at about this, the more we do, we just might be able to make more of a profit off of this as well. We're offering them something valuable, and they're paying us for that value. And so people start to also get fixated on the money aspect of it. But then there's also that sense of power. Hey, I'm someone really important. I'm someone really special. People really seek after me for what I'm able to offer them. Whether it's my visions, my dreams, my prophecies, I'm someone pretty important that people are willing to pay money for to hear more from. And so they start to get this ego. You know, they start to become above the church, above the laws of the land. And none of that applies to them anymore because they're in their own delusional world that revolves around them. And a lot of people have said that mental illness plays into this, that a lot of people who are prone to mental illness are easily influenced by these groups and heavily drawn to these organizations and events, that there really is a mental illness aspect of it. So anyways, long story short, lots of people who were connected to Chad and Lori, people in their inner circle, family members, spouses, just started dying. There have been lots of deaths connected to these two people. And then Lori's niece also began following Chad and Lori and their group and was told that she needed to leave her husband, that he was interfering with her divine mission. And she developed a relationship with someone in that organization. He also left his wife. So he leaves his wife, she leaves her husband. They get together, and then suddenly her former husband, his life is in danger. He gets a bullet through the windshield of his car that barely misses him, and he realizes his life is in danger. Now, real quick, here is something else that has surfaced. This was sent to me. This is from the divorce papers. Anyways, I have it here on the site if you want to follow along, but it says this picture is an excerpt from the divorce papers of Lori Vallow and her now dead ex-husband. This was brought to light today by a Fox News reporter, I believe. My concern is how this belief in multiple mortal probations has begun to cause problems. I want to pause right there. I brought this up as a red flag in my past videos in the last few months, and I wanted to say that a lot of people have reached out to me over the last year and even the year before saying, hey, do you believe in multiple mortal probations, in essence, reincarnation? And of course, I don't. And when I share with them that I don't, I believe that's a false doctrine, well, they ask me why. Why don't you believe it? Which tells me that they do. So then I just send them a link directly from the church website that says that that is a false doctrine that we do not believe. And then of course, that's not enough. They want to know more. Well, but why don't you believe it? Besides the church not supporting it, why don't you believe it personally? So then I have to go and find one of my past videos from a few years ago where I talk more specifically about this and lay out all the details of why I don't believe in this and how I even prayed and fasted about it because so many people were throwing it my way. And I received a major witness and confirmation to what I already knew, that this is not a true doctrine, that this is false. This is something that the enemy is using. This is a part of his plan to pull people off the path, to distract them, and to have them lose their faith. And so no matter what I have shared, it never convinced these people. When you have it set in your heart that something is true, but then you go seeking other people's opinions about it, that should be a sign for you right there that you know something feels a little bit off. You're not quite sure about it, or you wouldn't go seeking lots of other opinions. But when you go seek after those opinions and you find that they differ from yours, that those people don't believe what it is you're wanting to believe, then you just choose to dismiss those opinions and go on believing what you want to believe. So that's the pattern that I've noticed, but I have noticed that connection, that all of these groups believe in that. I have been in the same room with people who have got up and boldly said, I am Emma Smith. That's who I used to be. I've even run into people who have tried to tell me that about myself, and I completely rejected it. Again, this is the adversary trying to mess with our identity. He's all about identity confusion. I mean, he's doing that right now in the world. There's so many people out there who don't know if they're a man or a woman or who they really are. And that is a tool he is using to spread and promote this identity confusion within members of the church who are part of these groups and organizations. Again, you can't serve two masters. From everything that I've seen, you cannot be a member of the church and keep your membership and have that testimony in the restored gospel and the restored Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and then also have your foot over here with these rogue groups and organizations who are preaching doctrines that go against the doctrines of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. You cannot serve two masters. Your heart is with one or the other. And if you choose to remain in these other groups, it's clear that that's where your heart is. And I keep seeing time and time again as these people try to do that, try to maintain their membership and their callings in the church, but also affiliate with these other groups and organizations and go to their events and support them and pay them money. They eventually lose their membership in the church because they lost their testimony. They truly believe that the majority of the church is asleep. They are not spiritually awake. They are living in darkness. They're asleep. They're part of the problem. And that it's up to them to lead the saints to Zion and into the millennium. And they truly believe that. They don't truly support the leadership. They feel like that they have been led astray and they're not doing things the way they should do things. They get caught up in all these bizarre spiritual gifts and supernatural experiences and the excitement of it all and that addiction for the mysteries. And anyways, I've just seen it time and time again, and it continues to happen right now. Okay, so back to this. I came out several months ago against this doctrine. It seems like everyone who preaches this doctrine can lay claim to being some extraordinary person in a previous life. Sounds very prideful to me. So if this is how Lori thinks, and then she goes on to show the divorce papers, so I'm just going to go ahead and read those. So when it refers to mother, it's referring to Lori, and then also her ex-husband. So it says, Mother has recently become infatuated and at times obsessive about near-death experiences and spiritual visions. Mother has told Father that she is sealed, eternally married to the ancient Book of Mormon prophet Moroni, and she has lived numerous lives on numerous planets prior to this current life. Mother also believes that she was married to James the Just in a past life and also lived as Mary French in the 1800s, who was Joseph Smith Jr.'s natural grandmother. Mother also informed Father that she is a translated being who cannot taste death. I've heard that so many times, you guys. Sent by God to lead the 144,000, there it is again, into the millennium. Mother believes that she is receiving spiritual revelation and visions to help her gather and prepare those chosen to live in the New Jerusalem after the Great War as prophesied in the book of Revelation. Okay, those are some pretty strong beliefs right there. And I just want to say that a lot of people who have been excommunicated over the past 5 to 7 years that caused a lot of controversy and a lot of people couldn't understand it, I just want to say, without saying any names, that those very people believe these same doctrines. I know that. I know that. Let me just tell you, I know that. I have witnessed it. They believe these same doctrines, they preach them. They were doing that thing where they had one foot in the church, but another foot in these groups and organizations and doctrines. And though they weren't always preaching and teaching those doctrines in the light, out in public, they were teaching and preaching them around those they felt comfortable with. So again, sometimes we just need to trust the leadership of the church, the leadership of these wards and stakes, that maybe they know something that we don't. Maybe we don't have all the facts about a person's life and about their story and about who they really are. So I just had to add that in. Okay, it continues. On January 29th, 2019, during a phone conversation between the parties and after their physical separation, Mother informed Father that she was a god assigned to carry out the work of the 144,000 at Christ's second coming in July of 2020. So right there, this group that Chad is a part of, they are preaching and teaching that Jesus is coming in July of 2020. So now you can see that they have this sense of urgency. We've got to do whatever, however, and not let anyone get in our way so that we can accomplish our mission, because we only have a few months to do so because Jesus is coming in July. And that if Father got in her way of her mission, she would murder him. The next day, Father was on a business trip in Houston, and during another phone conversation, she kept referring to Father as Nick Schneider instead of Father's name. Father asked who Nick Schneider was, and Mother told him that Nick was Father's real name because Nick had killed Father and taken his identity. Mother proceeded to warn Father that she would kill him upon his return home and had an angel there to help her dispose of the body. She also mentioned that she could not trust Father and that she would not only kill him, but would destroy him financially. Since that conversation, Mother's communications with Father have been rare and intermittent. Upon his return home, Father petitioned for and received an order of protection against Mother. Anyways, so that right there illustrates what these people believe, what they're all about, and how they're willing to do anything at any cost to fulfill their mission and not let anyone stand in their way. So someone invited me to a Facebook group that was all about sharing details of this case, but what it ended up turning into was all kinds of craziness. Lots of people getting on there and just sharing dark and rated R fantasies about Chad and Lori and claiming they knew them, but sharing these dark, terrible, vulgar secrets, and it just got to be too much. I removed myself from that group. But before I removed myself, I saw that there was someone who offered her tarot card reading services for free on behalf of this case. And she went on there and she said, "Hey, I'm a tarot card reader. I'm really good at it. If anybody's interested, I'll go ahead and do a card reading right now and I'll share the results." And so many people, Latter-day Saint people, commented and said, "Oh, I'd love to hear. I'm curious to know." And so she posted her results and they went nuts over what she shared. My mom reminded me of that case of those 3 girls who had been kidnapped and chained in a man's basement for several years, being forced to have this man's children and on, and eventually they were able to escape. Well, I remember that when this news story broke, there was this reference to the mother who had listened to a psychic. There was a psychic on the case who offered her services, and she said, "You know what? Your daughter's dead. I'm getting a reading that she's dead." And so the mother stopped looking for her. She lost her faith and her hope, and she stopped looking for her because she listened to the psychic. And come to find out years later, her daughter actually was alive, and the guilt that she felt for giving up on the search for her daughter. That's sort of what this reminded me of when the people started seeking the services of the tarot card reader, and how quick people are to turn to the dark arts for answers rather than to turn to the Lord, who is the author of all truth, who gives us comfort and peace. So as I mentioned, Chad was affiliated with a lot of similar groups. And the founder of one of these groups reached out to me personally right around the time that I published my very first video message that was exposing all of these wolves in sheep's clothing. It was a 3-part video series, and just within 24 hours after I published that video, she contacted me. She said she sort of wanted to pick my brain and get advice and tips on how she could start a successful YouTube channel for her organization and how she could make it more well known and build a platform for it and start generating income and things of that nature. And I remember just sort of biting my tongue and feeling so uncomfortable, realizing she hasn't seen my videos, and so she probably doesn't know how I feel about all of this and how I'm not the best person to ask advice for that about because of the way I feel about it. And so I just kept trying to open up that door so we could have that conversation, because I thought, everything happens for a reason. Maybe the Lord directed her to me to call me this morning because I just published that video so I could tell her my true thoughts and feelings about all of that. Every time I tried to open up that door, she totally dismissed it, and she just kept going on, thinking I was in favor of that and in support of that route. And so I kept trying, I kept hinting and saying, well, it's been an interesting last few weeks. You know, some crazy turn of events have happened, so I don't know if I'm the best person to ask about this. And I kept trying to open up that conversation, but she never once said, oh, why? What happened? Tell me more. And because she kept kind of talking around it and just saying, oh, you know, we just want to grow and bring in income and do this as a full-time job and get more subscriptions and grow our viewers. And anyway, she kept talking about all of that, and after a while I had to go. I had an appointment, so I had to end the phone call, but it just felt that she wasn't in a place to hear that message yet. She wasn't getting those nudges from the Spirit to ask me those questions. As much as I tried to make it easy for her and open up that conversation, she was dismissing it all. She wasn't picking up on any of my cues. Maybe I should have been more blunt. But what I was wanting to tell her is, you know what? That's not what this is about. It should never be about money. It should never be about turning things of a spiritual nature into generating money from your subscribers and followers. Let me explain it this way. It doesn't cost me money to record a video on my phone and upload it to YouTube. And it doesn't cost me money to write up a blog post and distribute it freely on my blog. So why would I ever want to charge money to people so they can receive these messages from me? Why would I ever want to set up a paid subscription and receive money for sharing things that are spiritual, for sharing things that I've learned, and for helping people along the path, and in essence, for doing my part to help spread the gospel and help build up the Lord's kingdom on the earth? Why should I charge money for that? We covenant to consecrate our time and talents to build up the kingdom of God. We don't promise the Lord, you know what, I'll help build your kingdom, but I want something in return. It's got to be worth something for me, something of monetary value. We don't look at that. We focus on the eternal goal, on the eternal reward, not these temporal rewards. Yes, we need money to pay our bills, but if we're really struggling financially enough that we can't pay our bills, then maybe we need to get a second job. But our worldly income, I truly believe, needs to be separate from the things that we're doing to serve the Lord and help build His kingdom and do His work. And that covers so many areas. There's so many ways that we can help build up the members of the church and strengthen others' testimonies while also spreading the gospel to those who don't have it. But we should never be charging money for that or focusing on building a brand and an empire and an income from all of that. It's no different than what the money changers were doing at the temple. And the Lord made it very clear how He feels about that. You just need to be willing to sacrifice your time and your talents to serve the Lord. And if you're not willing to do that, if you feel like your time is too valuable, that you need to be compensated financially for this to be worth your time because you need to pay bills, then maybe you shouldn't be doing this right now. Or maybe it should be something small that you do on the side and not such a large scale. That's just the way that I feel. I feel like people who try to mix the two get thrown off course. And I've just seen it time and time again. I see it happening with people in our church and people in other churches, just trying to merchandise the word of the Lord, holding all these conferences and charging expensive prices for all these tickets so that people can come and hear the latest dream or vision, revelation or prophecy, or putting it all in a book and saying, if you want to know the full details of my dream and my vision or what the Lord showed me, you need to buy it. You need to pay for it. I just feel like we're in a time right now when if you really do have something you want to share, if you really did have a dream or a vision that you feel led by the Spirit to share, then just type it up and post it online. Don't try to make a profit off of it. Don't try to turn it into a business. But that's what so many people are doing. And then also, you have the two extremes. You have one group of people in so many churches who focus on material things of this world and prospering financially and focusing on your dreams coming true and your vision boards, and it's all about you, things of this world, you know, going on so many trips and vacations and purchasing your dream home and your dream car and having your dream income and, you know, all your wishes come true. And they just continue to focus on that and sort of view Jesus as a Santa Claus. You know, they view him as a genie, someone who you rub that magic lamp enough times and he's going to give you everything you could ever want in this world. But no, the Lord has taught us time and time again in the scriptures that we are not to seek after things of this world, that our reward is in heaven, and that's what we need to focus on, not the things of this world. Then you have another group who's the other extreme, and they're focusing on all the doom and gloom and the destruction and the terrifying things of the last days, and they're trying to put fear into people. If they put enough fear into people, people will give them money to attend their classes and their seminars and workshops and buy their products to prepare for the last days out of fear. So you have the fear-based group, and then you have the people over here that are preaching everything is roses and puppy dogs and life is one big candy store. You can have whatever you want. So you have these two major extremes that are way off balance. But the truth is, we have to be balanced. If we're really following the Lord, we're not going to be basing our choices and our decisions off of fear. We're not going to be living by that spirit of fear that will not rule our lives and our thinking and our decisions. But we're also not going to be living in a fantasy world where we're just focused on the things of this earth and having all the things we could have ever have wanted. We have to realize that yes, God does desire to bless us. And a lot of times when we are obedient and we are righteous, we are blessed. He does take care of us. We can live comfortably and we can have the things that we need and the things that we want. But that shouldn't be our primary focus in everything that we go after and what we base our entire life after. No, those things need to be of an eternal nature. We need to focus on our covenants and the things that we promise to do. And are we doing those things right now? Is that what we're putting all of our time and attention to? Is the Lord? Or are we just thinking about ourselves? If we put the Lord before ourselves, then all we're going to want to do is just serve him and listen to his voice and carry out his will. But when we're just thinking about ourselves, then we're doing what we want. And we're bypassing the Lord. We're dismissing the Spirit. Or we're opening ourselves up to deceiving spirits and we're being pulled off the path. So the point is we should never be living in extremes. And that's some wise counsel that was given in my patriarchal blessing so many years ago, was that I'm to never to go to any extreme in any area of my life. I'm to always maintain a balance. So that's always been very appreciated counsel that I've tried to follow in my own life. But back to this phone conversation I had with this sister who's over this organization, and I just kept feeling as I was on the phone with her, and I'd had this feeling before because she had mentioned things to me before when I'd run into her. She had messaged me before about this, and I've just always had this feeling that, you know, if you're seeking after an income with this, if you're doing this for an income and you're seeking to build a brand or an empire with this, right? It's not going to turn out favorable for you. That's how I really felt. I really felt this is not going to go the way you want it to go. And honestly, that can be a huge blessing because sometimes the Lord has to shake us up a little bit and allow things to happen in our lives that really wake us up and shake us up to show us that we need to redirect our focus or do a course correction, right? Now what's interesting is because this organization was one of the organizations that Chad was affiliated with, it is now receiving crazy amounts of negative attention from the press and the media all over the world. In just about every news article that I've read, this organization is listed as connected to Chad, and all these people are saying, stay away, stay away. That's the cult. He was a part of that cult. So they're referring to this organization as a cult. And I know that that's not the kind of attention she was hoping to get. I know that she had other plans for her organization, but now it's taking a turn because of Chad Daybell. But I also wanted to point out that many of the people that they have promoted through their organization are people who have since been excommunicated from the church because they had a foot in both worlds. They were trying to serve two masters and it didn't work out. So a lot of the people that they have promoted over the past few years have been excommunicated, and they've had to delete those people from their website, and it just seems to be a pattern. It just continues to happen. And I remember a couple years ago getting that feeling that I need to distance myself from these organizations because of that. So those were the red flags right there. But again, when you're so caught up in all of this, whether it's you're seeking after an income, the spotlight, you know, whatever it may be, if your intentions just aren't to serve the Lord first, period, to put His will first, even if it means sacrificing a lot of your time and your own money and your own resources to do so, if that's not your priority, then it's so easy to get sucked down these other paths and to be deceived. You don't recognize those red flags. You don't recognize that the people you're promoting, the people that you're supporting, the people that are in your inner circle are the wolves in sheep's clothing, are the people who are being deceived themselves. You don't pick up on any of that. There's no alarm bells going off for you. That's what I've noticed with all of these groups and organizations is they don't pick up on those red flags. That discernment is gone. And so it comes as a complete shock to them, a complete surprise when things go terribly wrong. So it's just crazy to see the timing of all of this, how I started bringing this up back in October, at the end of October. I first started talking about this and just hitting it with video after video up until December about these patterns and how I keep seeing this play out time and time again, and it continues to end the same way every single time. And a lot of you have agreed and said, I noticed those same red flags, I've had those same experiences, I completely get what you're saying. I completely agree with it. But then there are other people who don't understand it, and they don't agree with it. They don't see these red flags, and that's concerning. But again, everyone's on their own journey. It's all in the Lord's timing. So if people have gone off the path, He's going to try to find a way to bring them back. He's going to allow things to happen in their lives that shake them up, that give them a chance to correct their course and come back. And that's what we have to focus on. So one of the things that people continue to attack me about, my coming out against energy work and anything pertaining to chakra balancing. And that's what I've emphasized in all of my messages, is that anything that's tied to the chakras and opening up those energy portals in your body, that's where the danger lies. And I've explained that in videos and blog posts, and a lot of people have said, thank you so much for those messages. I needed to hear that. That was an answer to my prayer. So the videos have had a lot of positive impact on a lot of people. But every now and then there's people who are still upset, saying, how could you speak out against energy work? Energy work saved my life. Energy work brought me back to the gospel. It's such a good thing. Or how could you speak out against meditation? It's so good to meditate. Doctors and scientists have proven it. And it's almost as though people aren't hearing what it is I'm saying in those messages. It's like they're skipping over what I'm saying and just hearing what they want to hear. So again, I just want to reiterate that anything connected to chakra balancing, so if it happens to be a type of meditation, a type of yoga, right? Any type of modality that centers around opening energy centers in your body or doing work on your spirit body, that is a red flag. That opens up the door for so much demonic activity. Again, as I've said before, there is no counterfeit energy work to energy work. You know, there isn't a good energy work and a bad energy work, a dark side and a light side. Energy work is the counterfeit to the true power of Jesus Christ. And I've explained that in my videos, I've explained that in my blog posts, so I'm not going to hash that out again. But I've said that it's important to be still. It's important to ponder on the scriptures. But any type of spiritual practice, even if it is a meditation that's distracting, takes up so much of your day and pulls you off the path, is definitely a red flag. But when you look up meditation in the Bible dictionary, this is what it says. Consider, ponder, prayer, scriptures to study of or think. And it references all these scriptures of studying things out in your mind, pondering things in your heart. So I believe the type of meditation we should be doing when we hear about meditation in the scriptures is spending time with the Lord, pondering, praying, and thinking about certain doctrines and principles or choices in our own life. And as we ponder, the Spirit will begin to guide our thoughts and influence us. We'll begin to have impressions of what we should do and what's truth and what's error. But the world's definition of meditation is something completely different. A lot of people are fixated upon meditating and going into different states of consciousness and leaving their body. The people that I talk about who channel spirits, that's how it started. It started with that type of meditation, with just allowing their body to be still and completely emptying their mind so they didn't have any thoughts at all, so that they could open up to someone else coming in and giving them thoughts and having control over their body and their mind. But the Lord wants us to have control over our own bodies and our own minds. We have been given stewardship of our body. We're not to allow other entities to have access into our bodies and to control our minds. We are the stewards of our bodies that we've been given. We are to exercise control over our own thoughts and impulses and desires. That is the Lord's way, and we can be influenced by the Spirit of the Lord as to things that are righteous. But allowing all these spirits and entities from the other side to have access to our body and our mind and to take over our words and our thoughts and our voice, that's not the way of the Lord. He doesn't want us to go into these meditative states where our minds are empty and thoughtless. He wants us to have thoughts. He wants to fill our minds with good thoughts and with truth and with knowledge. But the adversary wants us to empty our minds and have nothing going on up there so that he can put what he wants in our minds, so that he can gain access and control to our mind and our bodies. And so it's a deception I see happening time and time again, and it's such a popular thing right now. I see it happening everywhere, not just in these organizations and cults and groups, but it's happening in other churches and other groups all over the world. So this is a very deceptive tool that Satan is using right now, and it's working. So back in November, I had this dream one night, and it was about a particular organization that I've talked about in my past video messages, but I've never said their name. But I had a dream about this organization. It's a group that I distanced myself from, and I cut off contact with all of these people. And I had this dream that the leader of the group, who is someone who channels spirits, as do many of the other people that follow her, but the top leadership of this group, there were 3 ladies. They were in this big conference center. It was like a big expo center, and it happened to be at night, so everyone was in the dark. It was dark outside. The building was very dimly lit, so you couldn't see very well. And for some reason, everyone attending the conference was wearing black. I believe there's a lot of symbolism in that. So there's not a lot of light, everything's dark, and the people are wearing black. They're in the dark. And they were all excited to be there and to listen to the latest messages from this lady and who she was channeling. And I remember being in the building and wondering, why am I here? I don't support any of this. Why am I here? How did I get here? And I was feeling very uncomfortable, trying not to give anyone eye contact, but just looking for the closest exit. And all of a sudden, this woman and her close friends came walking down the hallway past me. And I just remember I looked away, and as they passed me, she ran her fingers sort of through my hair and down my back, just kind of stroked me like that. And as she passed me, she turned her head over her shoulder and gave me this look like, I'm coming for you, honey. That's what I heard in my mind. I heard, I'm coming for you, honey. It's like she said it with her eyes. And chills just went up and down my spine, and I woke up, and it was just an awful feeling. And it wasn't but just a couple weeks after that they called me and reached out to me and tried to butter me up and pull me into their organization and tried to get me to change the way I feel about them and get other people to retract their messages and experiences that they have shared about them. Of course, I didn't allow that to happen, and neither did these other people, but it was very surreal that I had that dream and then it sort of happened. And again, I saw these people's true colors as they were very angry and very upset, but they tried to suppress that and tried to come across as happy and loving and nurturing, and really it was very manipulative, and they were very angry, very upset. So the dream was definitely a witness of that. So since my last video message, some friends of mine came to visit me from Idaho. They planned a little vacation down here, and they stopped by my home, and we visited for a while. They went to church with me. It was a lot of fun. And while we were visiting in my home, the wife of this couple, my friend, she started to tell me about how at one time in her life she was actually engaged to marry a man who happened to be one of the leaders of these groups that I've brought up in one of my past video messages, but of course I've never said his name or the name of his group. I just don't like to do that in my video messages. I figure if you really want to know, you'll connect the dots and figure it out yourself. But for my own protection, I don't ever mention their names. But this was one of the groups that I talked about. He was a man who believed all of these same doctrines and philosophies and was sort of building his own army of 144,000 people. So he was sort of going rogue, doing this on his own. So doing a lot of the same patterns of these other groups, but considering himself very separate from them. There was a lot of stories circulating about him also having an affair with the women in his group and grooming others to join him for a greater cause, and becoming very hostile and cruel to people who questioned him or questioned anything that he shared on his Facebook page. And of course, he goes by a pseudonym. He doesn't use his real name, as do a lot of these other leaders and groups. They change their name quite often. That's a common pattern. So he goes by a different name, but she figured out who he was because one day she reached out to him herself, and he of course knew who she was because he had been engaged to her before, but she never made that connection. So he was sort of playing mind games with her and saying things to her that were really bizarre and made her feel very uncomfortable and wasn't being so nice to her. And so I remember her and her husband reaching out to me months ago and saying, you know, here's a particular group and person that we no longer want to follow, just so you're aware of that. He's kind of not the nicest guy, and he comes across as someone who's very spiritual and someone that a lot of people admire and want to follow, but behind closed doors, he's not a nice person, and we've seen his true colors. Well, then they figured out who he really was, and then now that she knew who he really was, she really knew that he wasn't a nice guy. And he had a lot of skeletons in his closet. So I remember as we were talking about this, I have another friend who lives in Idaho. Well, I have a lot of friends that live in Idaho, but one of my other friends who lives there, I hadn't talked to in a long time, and I had been thinking about her a lot that week. She had been on my mind almost every day, and I felt that I needed to reach out to her. I just kept feeling that, but I kept delaying it, and as they were there, I brought her up and said, oh, I have another friend that lives in Idaho, and she might be interested in this. And anyways, that night, my friend from Idaho, who I hadn't talked to in what felt like a couple of years, she emailed me and she said, oh my goodness, I watched your recent video messages. I hadn't watched them in a long time. And I just watched your recent video messages, and oh my goodness, it's something I needed to hear. It was a big wake-up call for me, a big eye-opener. And now I'm going out and sharing this with all these other people. We need to talk. So a couple days later, we got on the phone and we talked, and it was just crazy how I had that impression that I needed to share some of this with her. Even though it had been a long time since I had seen her or talked to her, she was on my mind lately. And then she happened to reach out to me within just a few hours, having no idea that I had been thinking about her and having those impressions. So it's just amazing how the Lord works that way. But she said that my videos were so timely for her, and that the red flags were so helpful. She mentioned a podcast that she had just been invited to and asked me my thoughts about that. And it happened to be the very podcast of this man who my friends and I were just talking about in my living room hours before. This man who my friend had been engaged to, who's the true identity of the man who's over this Facebook group. And my other friend had just been invited to this Facebook group, and so I shared with her, don't join it. Do not join it. And so she didn't. So she says, wow, what about the timing of that, right? What are the odds that we were just talking about this man's podcast and his group, and I had this impression to reach out to this friend I haven't talked to forever, and then she reaches out to me right at a time when she has just been invited to join this podcast and join this group. So anyways, she said something that she was inspired by in my video message was when I talked about the real power of Jesus, that there is power in the name of Jesus. And so she took that to heart and she said, you know what, that is so true. I'm going to try that. She said she had been suffering from major pain, I believe from fibromyalgia, and all these things she had tried really hadn't been working. And so she decided finally just to exercise her faith in the name of Jesus Christ and ask for healing. And she said, you know what? I had a miracle. She said, I dropped about 80% of my pain and I'm down to just very little pain, which I think I can get taken care of by going into a doctor, having a procedure done, or trying some of these other things. I feel like I can get it 100% taken care of. But she said, I can't believe I had never done that. I can't believe I hadn't thought to call on the Savior and ask for a healing miracle. And it's so simple, it's so easy, and it's so quick. So she said she was inspired by my video to do that. However, I had to share with her that she inspired me as well because I had been having some pain in my right shoulder for so long and I hadn't even practiced what I had been preaching. So I went and did the same thing. I went and quickly prayed over my shoulder, and within less than 60 seconds, I tested it out, and the pain was gone. Every day that I woke up, I tried it again, tested it out, and the pain was gone. How easy was that? But prior to that, I had been looking into visiting specialists and setting up appointments, and I'm wondering if it was arthritis or if I may need a surgery because that's how bad the pain was. I couldn't even lift my arm. Look at me right now, you guys. So anyways, I just had to share that as well. Now I want to share a couple more things that have happened since the last video message. So I discovered that a world-renowned spiritual teacher of New Age who has had a powerful influence on so many, including Oprah Winfrey, and she's now a multimillionaire. I've mentioned her in some recent video messages, and I actually used to watch her videos several years ago. I think I shared that Michelle Money from Good Things Utah, when I was on the show a couple of times, she continued to recommend that I look into these videos and watch them, so I finally did. Anyways, had it been back then, if I would have learned that she was living in my town, I would have just hoped that I could run into her and meet her, but anyways, she bought a legendary property here in Layton. We featured it in one of our blog videos a few years ago. Gabe and I went on a little adventure and we shared the history behind that home and that property. Well, that's the home and the property that she purchased. Anyways, someone had found out that she purchased that property, so they started to Google it and search for information on it, and they came across that video that Gabe and I had made a few years ago. And this person, he said that those videos touched him, so he reached out to me and connected, and I was able to use that as an opportunity to share my testimony with him of Jesus Christ and how grateful I am for him and what he means to me. Anyways, that's why I love what I do. I love making these connections. I love getting to share my testimony of the gospel, and I just love being a powerful and positive influence for other people. So speaking of New Age and all of that, some other things that I wanted to talk about that happened since the last video message. There was a day when I went out Christmas shopping and I went to World Market. While I was there, there was a whole aisle of tiny little miniature Christmas gifts, and on those shelves, there were tarot cards being promoted as sort of like a stocking stuffer. And I thought, oh my goodness, everything that Christmas represents completely clashes with the purpose of tarot cards and the power behind them. And so there was these tarot cards everywhere and all these little miniature fortune telling games, and anyways, there was just this bad energy in that area. So I went to the other side of the store. Less than an hour later, I went across the street over to, I think it was Home Goods. I walked into Home Goods, and there on the table of Christmas gift ideas was Ouija boards right when you walk in, right at the entrance of the store. They had all these family board games, and then there was a big tall stack of Ouija boards. And I thought, oh my goodness, I just talked about this in my video message. Why is it that this is being promoted at Christmas time? Again, this goes against the complete opposite of what Christmas is all about and of what it means to follow the Savior. Anyways, that was a shock for me. Then just yesterday, somebody tagged me on this. Now my sister lives in the city of South Jordan, so if you live out there too and you've heard about this, I don't know if you're aware of it, but if you are, I'd love to hear your thoughts about it. But it says, South Jordan City, so this is being put on by the city. South Jordan City is pleased to invite you to a night of witchcraft and wizardry. And what's crazy about this, what people are saying is this is for February. This isn't even October. So that just really blows my mind. But get this, it's for mothers and sons. So it's a mother-son bonding activity where the mothers get to be witches and the sons get to be wizards. It says activities will include a walk through platform 934, a house sorting potion class, so how to make potions, wizard games, a visit to Honeyduke's Snacks, and butterbeer from the Three Broomsticks. It has the registration fees down below. Clearly the theme is Harry Potter. But again, it's promoting witchcraft and wizardry, which is a very real thing, something that the scriptures tell us to stay away from, to not entertain it. So clearly, this is a form of entertaining witchcraft, darkness, which invites darkness into your life. I know there's a lot of people who see nothing wrong with this, and they see it as just good, innocent, wholesome fun. But that's exactly how the adversary wants you to see it. We've talked about this so many times in past videos, so I'm not going to rehash it, but just thought that was really interesting that that's coming up in February. Okay, now I want to talk about this year that we've entered into, the year 2020. We can now officially say we're in the 20s. We haven't been able to say that before. We haven't really been able to coin a name for the past couple of decades. So we now can say that we're in the 20s, which sounds so funny. But I'm a firm believer of patterns that repeat. So I love to study history. I've always loved history. It's always been one of my favorite subjects. So I thought right now we could take a moment just to go back in time and check out what was happening during the 20s to look for any patterns that might be repeating in this upcoming decade. So let's take a look. It was a decade referred to as the Roaring 20s. So America had just come out of World War I. Suddenly, industry began to grow and America began to prosper. They also call this period the Golden Age 20s. Because of the economic boom following the war, all of the hyper-emotional patriotism that stemmed from World War I began to slowly taper off. Politics sort of returned to a normalcy. There was significant changes in lifestyle and culture. This is when the media began to really focus on celebrities and Hollywood and all of that glamour, especially sports heroes and movie stars. They began to build large baseball stadiums and more movie theaters. Women felt liberated. They were given the right to vote, and they demonstrated that liberation in sort of this rebellious way by cutting off their hair and lifting up their skirts and showing their bare arms as a way to show that they were free. It was the era of jazz music, so it was known as the Jazz Age. So you have this change in music, this change in fashion, and so many cultural trends that are starting. And according to this historical patterns, every time there's been a paradigm shift in global affairs, it's always been followed immediately by prosperity. It's happened in the 20s, in the 50s, and the 90s. It's interesting that again, we're at a period in time where there's rumors of war. Especially right as we speak right now, this very day, with what's going on with Iran. War nowadays is done a little bit differently than it was back then. I mean, if you look at it, you can consider that we are in some type of a war with China. It's really done nowadays with just sanctions. What's interesting is outside of the United States during this time period, we saw a rise in communism. There were lots of radical political movements growing in lots of regions. And that fear of the spread of communism, so that fear of what was taking place overseas, led to that emergence of the far-right political movement and fascism over in Europe. But all of these dictators that started popping up everywhere started to create problems for the economy, which led to the devastating Wall Street crash of 1929, the end of the decade. So there you have it. You have this period of growth and prosperity, changes in politics, changes in culture and society. You have all of this change, which ends in a big financial crash at the end of the decade. Anyways, you can see right now that it's been escalating again. We've seen the economy and the stock market continually on the rise since President Trump has been in office. However, with the things that are happening right now in world events that are involving the United States, it's creating a lot of fear and uncertainty. And so as you can see, those numbers are starting to go down again. It'll be interesting to see if that pattern starts to play out during this decade, if we're gonna see a major war and we're gonna see financial crash of that magnitude. But one thing's been for sure, the past few years have been very prosperous for America. Anyways, if you have any thoughts about that, I'd love to hear. So during the Christmas break, I really felt that I needed to listen to The Saints. I needed to finish volume 1 and then listen to volume 2. I had started it several months ago and then I got distracted and I never finished, but I just continued to have this constant feeling that you need to listen to this, you need to listen to this. So I took the time during my break to do that. So every time I was cleaning, which was a lot, I was listening to the saints. And it was so interesting as I was listening to everything that happened to the early saints of the church, that whole journey that they went on, I really started to feel that we're about to experience a repeat of a lot of that. Some things that stood out to me were many of the members of the church at that time had very powerful testimonies. They were a great influence in those communities. And then something happened. They strayed a little bit off the path, and then they ended up being excommunicated, leaving the church and taking others with them. After that, they became the church's worst critics. They were the ones causing the most problems for the saints. I think a lot of times we think it was just other people who didn't understand and just weren't too welcoming of the saints. But what stirred up all of their fears and all of their uncertainties were these former members of the church who had been excommunicated, who were going around stirring up lies, rumors, and a lot of contention. They were the drive behind a lot of those mobs. And a lot of it they were putting in the newspaper and printing all over the country, and it just became a nightmare for the saints. Not too long after I had that thought, that story came out in the local news. I'll just read this Deseret News article right here. It says, David A. Nielsen, a former employee of the investment arm of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, filed an IRS complaint last month alleging the church should be forced to pay taxes on returns made from invested tithing funds, and challenging the faith's investment strategy, humanitarian efforts, and tax exemption status. So he made a lot of really bold allegations against the church. And these videos spread all over YouTube. They received a lot of traffic, a lot of views, a lot of response. And this began to gain a lot of momentum in national news media. So it was his twin brother that posted videos on YouTube with a link to documents that he said his brother took from his former employer in order to back his claims. Even a local news reporter from the Salt Lake Tribune didn't shed very good light on this story. She said, 2 weeks ago, I wrote a column about feeling uneasy after paying my tithing. December is the season of individual tithing settlements for members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And what I find unsettling is that the church, unlike many other religious denominations and charities, never explains what it's doing with my donations. I would very much like to know, not just for my own benefit, but because accountability is as important for institutions as it is for individuals. Yet the church has not released a substantive financial statement in 60 years. So then again, you have a member of the church speaking not so positively about the church. As you can see, she says she feels uneasy about paying her tithing. And this is interesting to me as well because I have heard from people that I know in recent months who have lost their testimony and become inactive and are thinking about leaving the church because they don't agree with tithing. So this is another tactic that the adversary is using right now. And here's how the church responded. We take seriously the responsibility to care for the tithes and donations received from members. The vast majority of these funds are used immediately to meet the needs of the growing church, including more meeting houses, temples, education, humanitarian work, and missionary efforts throughout the world. Over many years, a portion is methodically safeguarded through wise financial management and the building of a prudent reserve for the future. So saving for a rainy day. This is sound doctrinal and financial principle taught by the Savior in the parable of the talents and lived by the church and its members. All church funds exist for no other reason than to support the church's divinely appointed mission. I loved that. I couldn't have written a better response myself. Loved it. After the church issued that statement, it just all sort of died down. But anyways, it reminded me of what I had just been listening about in the history of the saints and how we're starting to see that happen again. We're starting to see people who are bitter towards the church who have left for one reason or another. They are the ones who end up attacking the church and working against the church. I kind of get the feeling we're going to see more of that with these patterns that I'm seeing with the adversary and what he's trying to do right now on a local level, a national level, and a global level. It just makes sense that he's going to stir the pot wherever he can, but he's especially going to focus on what it is the Lord's trying to do right now. He's going to try to interfere with his plans. And it's interesting because back then this was happening right at the beginning of the restoration, and now we're at the winding up scenes of the restoration. And we're seeing some of these same patterns start to play out again. You see, Satan didn't want this work to go forward in the very beginning, and so he did all that he could to stop it. And those efforts failed. And now that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is all over the earth, and we're finally in those winding up scenes before the Savior returns, he's once again at it, trying to do all that he can to stop the work from happening. Because he understands these last days events, he understands prophecy, he understands what needs to be done, and he's going to do all that he can to interfere. So I get the feeling we can expect more of that. So something just to be watchful for. But what I found interesting is that a lot of Christian news outlets really took to the story. I also found it interesting that the accuser wanted money. So that always says a lot right there. Also, as I was listening to the saints, another little pattern that I'm seeing is the prophet Joseph talked about spiritual gifts. And we've talked about this in some of the recent video messages, where he talked about gifts that he was seeing happening in the church, and they concerned him. And so after some fasting and praying, he learned from the Lord that not all gifts come from the Spirit and are of the Lord. And a lot of these gifts that he described were people saying that they were overcome by the Holy Spirit. They were running around the church and swinging off of chandeliers and shaking on the floor and scooting their bodies around and falling down and sort of making quite the ruckus and quite a scene in the sacrament meetings. He learned that that was a false spirit, that they were being deceived, that that was not the Holy Spirit. There was not a spirit of reverence in those meetings. And so he shared that revelation and put a stop to that. But we're seeing a repeat of that right now. And I've talked about this in so many of my recent videos, how so many people are getting caught off guard with these gifts that they believe are gifts of the Spirit. They're channeling beings from the other side of the veil, allowing beings to enter into their body. There's a lot of people who are speaking in tongues, but some of these tongues that I have heard, I just didn't have a peaceful feeling about it. I remember being at an event and there was a woman making these loud clicking sounds with her mouth, just clicking her tongue, and sort of sounded like Morse code. And she did it so loudly all throughout the meeting that you couldn't hear the speakers, and she did it over the music, and it was really distracting. Hymns and songs where I would normally feel the Spirit, I didn't feel it. I thought maybe she had a disability, and so I asked somebody, could you tell me why that woman is making that sound? Does she have a disability? And they said, no, that's her prayer language. She's speaking in tongues. Anyways, it made me think how there's so many people out there who just openly do this in front of anyone and everyone any time of day, and there's nothing sacred about it. During the time of the restoration, this was happening as well, and the prophet taught that people should only speak in tongues when there's someone there who can interpret, someone who has that gift of interpretation, and so that they can deliver a message from the Lord. What's interesting at all these events and all these things that I have seen, I mean, it's online, it's on YouTube, it's happening all over the world. There's no one interpreting. People are just walking around all in unison at these group events and conferences, and they're all just speaking in tongues, and who knows what spirit they're operating through. You know what I mean? It's just lots of people gathering together, lots of strangers, and they're all speaking in these different languages that they don't even understand. They don't know what they're saying, and they're truly believing it's of the Spirit. It's usually at these events where people fall to the floor and are shaking and moving around and barking like dogs and not acting like themselves or laughing uncontrollably and hysterically. We've talked about this in my past video messages, but the same thing was happening during the early restoration of the church. So I find it very interesting that we're seeing a huge explosion of this again right now. So just something else to be aware of. You see, the early saints of the church thought that anything that was supernatural, anything that they couldn't explain, must be from God. It must be good. It must be from the Lord. And the prophet taught them through revelation that no, just because it's supernatural doesn't make it from the Lord. There are lots of false spirits going about the earth right now trying to deceive many. and they're doing it through these gifts of the Spirit. It's no different than what's happening today. And that's what's guiding and influencing all of these break-off groups and organizations and cults. They are all heavily involved in these gifts of the Spirit. I've seen it happening with my own eyes. I want to point out also, right after my last video message, people started reaching out to me and sharing with me another up-and-coming, I don't know what to call it, movement, leader, group teaching. But all I'm gonna say is that it's something that people are very excited about. It's again another thing that's opening up mysteries and knowledge, and people are getting really excited about it. It's connected to the Book of Mormon, and this person has written a book about it and put together a website about it, and I guess in essence you could say he's sort of decoding things in the Book of Mormon. And so people are just really excited about this, and they've been sharing it like crazy all over social media. And does this guy have a book? Can I follow him? What's his website? And I've seen comments in these conversations, here's some more red flags, of people saying, wow, this is so much more exciting than what they're teaching us in church. Why don't we get to learn these things and come follow me? Why don't we get to learn these things in Sunday school? Why do we have to find these things out on our own? This makes church seem so boring. And I keep hearing that over and over. It's another pattern. Again, look for patterns. It's the same pattern that's happening in all these other groups that I've mentioned in past videos. So then I went to the website of this man who's over this new rising movement or knowledge, and off to the side he has a list of all the pages that he recommends of other websites and groups that he supports and follows, and just about every one of these groups is one of the wolves in sheep's clothing that I have made reference to in my recent videos. So that was enough for me. That was all I needed to see to realize something else to stay away from. But of course, it's difficult to tell that to people who are really excited about it and want to share it and think that this is something that I'm really going to like as well. I just had to put that out there. Be so careful, you guys, because it's like right when all of these other wolves were exposed during the last 3 months, all of these other groups and organizations that have been in the spotlight in a negative way, Satan has to come up with something else. And so he's bringing in the next best thing and trying to get people excited about that. And it's a distraction. And again, it's designed to pull you off the path. It's the same design every single time. You can tell that all of this is authored by the same person, by the adversary. Anyways, I just had to share that. Now here's something sort of random, but I think fits nicely in this part of the video. This is something that someone shared on Facebook. I've got a screenshot right here. This is out of a page of Stephen Covey's book written in 1982. It seems to be very prophetic, and somebody was just reading this book and happened to notice this and shared it on Facebook. So I'm just going to read that to you. It says, "The point is that we will never be released from our most important church job, that of husband and father or wife and mother. It will be with us eternally. We will, however, be released from all of our work on the scaffolding from time to time. Eventually, perhaps, the scaffolding will be withdrawn and the eternal organization will be the patriarchal family. I have mentioned the renewed and increased emphasis upon the family as the fundamental unit of the church. Joseph Smith's leadership philosophy, quote, 'I teach some correct principles and they govern themselves,' has also been emphasized in recent years. Thus, more and more capacity is developed within the parents to carry on the program of the church, right within the home setting. Perhaps it will take another generation before this new software program fully takes, but all of us can see it happening. I believe that the closer we come to the millennium, the more we will pick up momentum on focusing on fundamental principles such as the gospel and priesthood and the family and ordinances and quorums and scriptures and revelation and God-centered living." He was right. It did take another generation. I was born in 1981. I'm now a mother of 4 kids, and this is happening right now. We are putting more of an emphasis on the family, and as Stephen Covey said, it's being developed right now within the parents to carry on the program of the church right within the home setting. You guys, it's home church. How awesome is that? So I absolutely love that when I saw that, and I just had to share. So right after I published my last video message, the following Sunday we had a stake high councilman come visit our sacrament meeting and speak. And it was really interesting what he chose to talk about. He focused on stars, and it really caught my attention. Remember in that last video message, I talked about the old Titanic and the new Titanic and how both of those ships were owned by a company with the word star in it. You had the white star lines for the first Titanic and the blue star lines for the second Titanic. And I'm gonna bring up something more about that here in just a minute. So he talked about stars, and he talked about following your path and following the covenant path. Now at this time, that very weekend, we had issues with the star on our house. We have a giant star that we hang above our garage. And for some strange reason, this has never happened before, all of a sudden we pulled up to the house one day and it was lopsided, like someone had pulled on it, and it's a very heavy star. It's solid, it just doesn't move. Sometimes we've had some crazy storms in December and that thing hasn't even swayed. And here it was crooked, like someone had really moved it, but you can't reach it. It's very high up. You'd have to get a ladder. So we found that really interesting. So my husband got out a ladder, he climbed up and he fixed it. And then the very next day, the same thing happened again. We just couldn't explain it. It's just one of those really weird things. And so I thought, okay, clearly someone's trying to get my attention about a star, right? Stars. It wasn't too long after that we were coming out of Smith's grocery store. I was with my family, and my son Tatum looked up at the sky and he said, "Mom, what is that in the sky? Is that Jesus coming?" So of course I look up, oh, am I ready? I look up at the sky and I see what he's talking about. Here's a screenshot. There's the moon and Venus shining so bright. So I happened to see on Facebook that day that yes, there was a major event happening with Venus. And of course it made the star very bright in the sky, and this is right around Christmas. And so my son was thinking about the star and the story of Jesus, and he's thinking, "Mom, if there was a star that bright when Jesus was born," he says, "maybe that's the star for when he's coming back. I know it means he's coming back. He's coming back, Mom. He is coming back now." And oh, he was just very set on telling me that. So then we have this high councilman who's talking about stars, and he says that just had been on his mind all week, so he felt he needed to talk about stars. He said that he concluded, because he had been seeing stars everywhere as well, that it was drawing attention to following the star. Just as the wise men followed the star that led them to Jesus, he concluded that the covenant path leads us to Jesus. So if we follow the covenant path, it's just like following the star, just like the wise men did, that led them straight to Jesus. That's the way we need to look at the covenant path. Now, in the last video message, I talked about in the year 2022, there's supposed to be a new star in the sky for about 6 months. And it's very significant, and it's in the constellation of the cross. How that's also the year that the new Titanic is supposed to launch, which is by a company called Blue Star Lines. So I just kept seeing these connections to stars. Well, anyways, my friend Beth reached out to me and she shared some interesting thoughts with me as well that triggered some more thoughts. So I just wanted to share that with you. So bear with me. Our conversation was really long and lasted over a few days. So I'm gonna try to skip through some of this. But we started out talking about that big news story with Chad Daybell and his wife Lori, and brought up some things about how there are lots of people who are concerned that this is giving a bad name to those who are trying to follow the prophet and prepare. I've thought before about how it might give a bad name to the church, to people who don't understand and are on the outside looking in, thinking, oh, hearing in some of the stories that these were members of the LDS church, thinking that that's how we all are. From what I've heard, someone sent a timeline to me showing me all the events that have been verified of this entire crazy story, And it showed in there that Chad Daybell had been excommunicated from the church very recently, around the time he married Lori. Something about he was excommunicated for believing that he was a prophet. There were a lot of things circulating saying that you can't believe what you're hearing about Chad and Lori. You can't believe these things. They're just simply not true. A lot of it's fabricated and made up. Don't believe anything that family members and relatives are saying because they're the bad guys. Chad and Lori are the good guys. They're innocent. So they're like, here's the real story. Here's what's really happening. The children are safe. The parents know where they are. You know, they're being hidden so that they can be protected because the family's trying to kidnap them, and this whole dramatic story. Well, somebody took that to the police department and said, can you verify any of this? And he looked at that story and he said, none of it's true. This is all a lie. Here's the facts. And it was completely contradictory to what these people who are defending Chad and Lori are saying is the truth. And the police department said, absolutely not. None of that is true. So this is sort of how the conversation was started out. But anyway, she brought up something really interesting as we switched topics. She brought up something that she noticed. She began to talk about these 7-year time periods in church history. And she said they start and end on the holy feast days, and big events often accompany them. Sometimes even events happen at the 3.5-year mark too. And really big events seem to happen at the 14-year mark. So for example, April 1830, the church is established. Fall 1833, the stars being cast down sign was fulfilled in the book of Revelation. That's also referenced in the Saints in volume 1. They talk about that when the prophet came out one night and all the saints came outside and the mobs were driving them away, and they look up and they see all the stars falling from heaven. And the prophet said that was a fulfillment of that prophecy. So there again is that reference to stars. Let's see. She said at 3.5 years, being nourished in the wilderness begins. Spring 1837, dedication of the Kirtland Temple with all the blessings poured out. Turning point for the church. 1838, the first missionaries are sent to England, required to begin mission from the far west temple site, even though they had been driven out of Missouri by that point. Dan Jones was one of the missionaries and thousands who joined the church. In fall of 1841, a 3.5-year mark, proclamation issued by Joseph Smith for saints to gather to Nauvoo. Many had already felt the Spirit call them to do so and had left England. But the official call came here. Spring 1844, 3.5 years to the day after the proclamation to gather was issued. Joseph Smith was martyred. This ended the first 14-year period of the church. Major change for the church. So right now, we just ended a 7-year cycle of the church in April 2019. We are starting the next 7-year cycle now. When it ends in 2026, it will have been the 14th 14-year cycle of the church. That seems significant. She says what came into mind was the Hebrew poetry form, and she showed this image right here. She says where the start of the chapter and the end of the chapter reflect each other. Only the end chapter resolved the issue better, like the above example. And I thought, what if we are repeating patterns starting in the first and second 7-year cycles as we finish up this 14th 14-year period? Now that's a deep thought. And she had no idea that I had also been feeling this way. I had also been thinking about this, how it feels like we're about to repeat things that happened in the early part of the church, the beginning of the restoration, those first 14 years. She says, so look at this. Fall of 2012, start of new 7-year cycle for the church. President Monson announces age change for missionaries. Missionary numbers surge and new missions and areas open. Fall of 2015, 3.5-year mark, the fourth tetrad blood moon eclipse happens. Many awaken to the time we are in. For me, this is when I personally started receiving revelation about what time we were in and to pay attention more. It seemed that many woke up around this time. March 2019, conclusion of the 7-year cycle, the Rome Temple dedicated. Possibly fulfillment of Revelations 19. Seems an incredibly significant temple to be dedicated. President Nelson calls it a hinge point for the church and that the work will accelerate. This really caught my eye as paralleling the first 7-year cycle of the church. Now, the next part is only speculation about what is coming, but it is the thoughts and feelings I keep being led to over and over. President Nelson's assigned readings keep pointing to the Far West Temple. At least that keeps jumping out to me. My personal feelings are that he will announce the building of it in this upcoming historical conference. That's just based on the feelings and thoughts that have come as I've read the chapters that he assigned. I have been to the Far West Temple site 5 times in my life over the past 20 years. I began noticing the really strong and special spirit there on visits number 3 and number 4. It's the most sacred places I've ever felt outside of an actual temple. So much so that I try and arrange for us to stop by whenever we are driving through Kansas City to feel it again. We stopped by to visit it about 2 months ago, and I was surprised by 2 things. Number 1, the sacred and peaceful feeling could be felt as we entered the parking lot, not just walking the actual grounds, but driving up to it. My whole family fell silent and each commented on what a peaceful feeling we felt. This was new from my previous experiences there. The second thing I noticed is that in the first time in my 20 years of visiting the area, the field next to the temple ground was not plowed. Brush had been allowed to grow there instead. Every time I visited, I've walked the plowed grounds of what used to be Far West, the pioneer town, and looked for pottery shards left over from when the saints had to flee there. I found them before and shared them with my tour group back in 2001. Last time I was there in January 2018, it was plowed and my kids helped me look. The time before was November 2016, and the kids helped me look in plowed fields then too. But this time, November 2019, the field had been abandoned and weeds and grass came up almost to my knees. I was shocked. Since then, I've learned that just in the last year or 2, the church stopped contracting with local farmers to plant in the Adam-on-Diamond fields. I'm assuming this is what has happened with the Far West fields too. Very interesting. Someone in the area also noted there is construction going on now behind the tree line in Adam-on-Diamond. Okay, so I shared my experience also with going out there last year and visiting those sites and the sacred, peaceful feeling that I felt as well. I think I've talked about that in one of my videos, how there was complete silence. When I was at Adam-on-Diamond, you couldn't hear any bugs, any birds. There wasn't even a breeze blowing, not even a leaf blowing in the wind. It was completely still. I've never experienced anything like that before out in nature. She said, so while I was there, I was studying the plaque they have posted on the temple site. It's from the scripture in Doctrine and Covenants that tells them to build a temple on the site because it is holy ground. That really struck me. The spot was already holy before it was designated as a temple spot. Why? What had happened there to make it holy? As I stood there, I prayed and asked that question. The word Noah came into my mind. No other explanation, and I didn't know why. The other thought I had there, though, was why were those called to go open the mission in England required to leave from the Far West Temple site to start their mission? The Lord knew how dangerous that would be. The brethren had to sneak down there from Nauvoo in the dead of night to fulfill that prophecy. There were mobs waiting to catch them all day, and an extermination order was still in effect. Why such a specific command of where they left from? Much later, I asked this question in prayer, and the thought came about the animals going on to the ark 2 by 2. As I thought about that, missionaries also go out 2 by 2. It now has me wondering if the Far West Temple site is perhaps where Noah built the ark and gathered the animals, or perhaps where he received revelation to do so. Just guessing based on what is coming up in my study and pondering on these things. So I want to pause right there, and I got permission from Beth to share our conversation, because if there's anyone out there who has any additional thoughts about this, I'd love to hear from you. She said, the other thing that has come up for me constantly this past year is the British Isles, which we've talked about a lot with each other, but also Dan Jones. I didn't even remember who he was the first time I heard about him last year, but he kept coming up a lot. Enough to bring up in conversation and learn that he was coming up for another friend as well. Even when we were touring Nauvoo a few months ago, the story the tour guide chose to tell was about Dan Jones and his life. He was a Welshman riverboat captain that would drop things off in Nauvoo all the time. How others described the saints as horrible people did not match up with what he saw. He ended up joining the church. He was then sent back to Wales as a missionary and baptized thousands within just a few months. He is still one of the top baptizing missionaries of the church. As our trip ended and we were flying away from Missouri, all these experiences were going through my mind, and I thought, why does Dan Jones keep coming up? And in my mind came the phrase, the spirit of Dan Jones is returning. I love this. And I just felt the Spirit go head to toe through me with that message. The impression I keep having is that missionary work and success is about to skyrocket, much as it did with Dan Jones and those early missionaries that were the first to go to a foreign land. Perhaps Dan Jones is about to help lead this work from the other side. But there is about to be a major surge in people joining the church, and I think it will be from the British Isles. Now with these catastrophic fires in Australia, and them also being British descendants, I can't help but wonder if the Lord is allowing it to happen to prepare their hearts for a major increase in the work there as well. Somehow everything seems to point to it being important that the Far West Temple site is important for launching new missionary work, especially to the House of Israel in the British Isles. At least it was the first time. Oh, I'm feeling it. That's why I really wanted to share this. It's something that's just pretty neat to think about. So with all these thoughts I've had and us entering a new 7-year time period and the last 7-year time period paralleling the first one the church had, what if this one that we are in parallels the second 7-year time period the church had with something like this? And she gives an example. April 2020, Far West Temple announced some kind of increase in missionary efforts. Announced. British Isles success explodes like it did with Dan Jones's mission. Fall 2022. Some kind of Gathering Israel proclamation given, paralleling the Gathering proclamation issued 3.5 years after the British Isles mission announced in the early church days. This parallel is interesting to me because in another study I was doing, a time of gathering to safety came up for fall 2022. Also, animals gathered 2 by 2 came to mind. And then she talks about how she began seeing the number 22 and 222 all over the place and just felt that it continued to point her back to these thoughts. She says, now I don't believe in the type of call-out concept that these offshoot groups came up with and promote. I don't know what kind of gathering the church would promote, just that fall 2022 is a time to watch for some kind of proclamation. And maybe it's more of a call to gather in heart. Who knows? Spring of 2026, the 7-year cycle ends, as does the 14th 14-year cycle for the church. That seems a big deal. I'm not going to venture and speculate what it could mean, but it seems it will be a major shift or change in the church. Also a time to pay attention to. So it's interesting to consider the parallel patterns of the beginning of the restoration, which I believe is why the prophet asked us at the last general conference to study out the restoration to prepare us for this upcoming April general conference. I think he wants us to pay attention to what was happening then so that we look for those parallels and patterns repeating, especially for some of these major events. And then also it's interesting to compare parallels and patterns from the time period in world history of the 1920s, as it's now a century later and we're now entering the 20s again. Just some food for thought. Then she shared something that President Nelson shared on New Year's Day just recently. So here's a screenshot. He said, "When I spoke during last October's General Conference, I designated 2020 as a bicentennial period commemorating 200 years since God the Father and his beloved Son Jesus Christ appeared to Joseph Smith in a vision. That singular event in human history initiated the restoration of the Lord's gospel, an unfolding restoration that continues today. God loves all of his children and has a vision for each of us. Just as he listened to Joseph's prayer in 1820, he listens to you and yearns to speak with you through the Spirit. We invite you to be a major part of sharing the message of the ongoing restoration of the Savior's gospel. We will share more about this soon." That's exciting right there. But you can start today by acting on the invitations I extended to you at the last General Conference to immerse yourself in the glorious light of the restoration. You may wish to begin your preparation by reading afresh Joseph Smith's account of the first vision as recorded in the Pearl of Great Price. Or ponder important questions such as, how would my life be different if my knowledge gained from the Book of Mormon were suddenly taken away? Or how have the events that followed the first vision made a difference for me and my loved ones? Select your own questions. Design your own plan. Act on any of these invitations to prepare yourself for sharing the important messages of the ongoing restoration. It is your personal preparation that will help April's General Conference become for you not only memorable, but also unforgettable. The time to act is now, not tomorrow, not next week, but right now. This is a hinge point, he's saying it again, in the history of the church, and your part is vital. You see, he needs us. He needs us for what God has in store, for what's coming next. We need to study the restoration so we understand it, so that we understand what it is the Lord's wanting to do right now. And we can see clearly that Satan's mimicking that. He's trying to counterfeit that with all of these other offshoot groups. She said, when President Nelson shared this on New Year's Day, these are the parts that stuck out to me. That something is about to be announced to challenge us all more with sharing the gospel and reiterating that we are at a hinge point. So just some thoughts about possibly why all this England stuff keeps coming up. So we've had a lot of ongoing conversations about England and the Queen and events going on over there. So that's what she's referring to. I don't know what it all means. I felt the Spirit direct me with some of this, and I'm left speculating at other parts. I know for me personally, family history work for my British Isles ancestors has suddenly opened up this past year. That has not happened before. I usually see that happen when there's about to be an increase of activity with the church in that area in the land of the living. I saw it with Cuba. I saw it with Indonesia. So I'm very curious if seeing it with England means it's about to happen there too. Some fun food for thought. So I'm going to skip over some things for the sake of time, but I responded and said, I am reminded of Elder Holland speaking at that stake in Texas. And this was a video I think I put out in January of 2019. I'm not sure exactly which video, so you'll just have to go watch those. And I don't know where it's at in the video. But someone had sent me a video of a sister talking about her mother who lives in Texas, who lives in that area, who attended that conference, and how Elder Holland spoke to them, and how he said that the first presidency was in the process of handing the church over to Jesus Christ himself. Anyways, I was reminded of that. And again, that's something that wasn't published. It wasn't public. It was just announced in that conference. So the woman who recorded this video was very excited and a little bit emotional. It was very sincere, very genuine, and she really just felt an urgency to share that testimony with her inner circle article. Somehow that video made its way to me and I watched it and I really felt a witness of what she was sharing. I'm going to skip over a lot more things, but we talked about trumpets and President Trump and again, President Nelson turning 100 years old in 2024. I talked about that several videos back, but the significance of that also being another election year and the end of a presidential office. I then said, I talked about 2022 in the last message. The new star is supposed to appear and the Titanic 2 will launch. That is a repeat as well. So again, we're talking about repeats. Blue Star Line is the company and is supposed to launch out of Australia. That is where the company is. 2022 sounds like a very big year. The Titanic first launched from Southampton and now it will launch from Australia. So we have England and Australia coming up in our conversation again. The first Titanic was launched by a British company and the second time around it's being launched by an Australian company. So then we talked again about the Missouri area being a possible location of Noah when he received that instruction to build the ark, or where he possibly even built the ark. And she says it does make sense that with all the wickedness that's going on, that Noah would have returned to the sacred area, and that with it being where the Garden of Eden had been, there was an abundance of animals to gather. So I thought that was a really interesting thought. And then she shared this with me. She looked up Titanic and was reading about it, and she found this thing called the Romandicea Titanic. It says that there's also a project called the Chinese Romandicea Titanic replica ship, which had its keel laying on November 29th, 2016, commissioned by 7-Star Energy Investment. So there again, another company with the word star in it connected to Titanic. I talked about a few videos back how I kept seeing Titanic everywhere. It was coming up everywhere and I didn't know why. And it's funny because my youngest, my little boy Tatum, continues to draw pictures of Titanic every single day and put them on our fridge. This has been going on for weeks. So it will be permanently docked within a reservoir. And of course, you're not seeing this, but all of these screenshots and all of these conversations we're having are always sent at the time 202 or something 22. I mean, there's just 22s all over this. And so we were just laughing at that, at the odds of that happening. So again, there's the 22, the 2x2, the year 2022. It's just interesting to connect these dots. So could we see some breakthrough in China with the gospel of Titanic proportions, right? That's just coming to my mind right now. Maybe Titanic proportions in Australia, Titanic proportions in China, and then back to the original Titanic, Titanic proportions in England or the British Isles. But I have to say that the news that has been taking place in these 3 countries has been of Titanic proportions. And again, with that word star connected to all 3 of those companies that have launched these Titanics, reminding us to look to that star, to get on that covenant path and stay on that covenant path that leads us to the Savior. So the covenant path is the star. So if we have major breakthrough in all of these areas, that's even more people being brought onto the covenant path and following that star back to their Savior. Pretty neat, right? Just something to think about. Then she shared that that night she was sorting through some things in her home because she's preparing to move, and she came across this package of Noah and his ark and all the animals. And it was so funny, just another little sign, another little witness. So then in another conversation I was having with Beth and another one of our friends, our friend just brought up, she's like, I've just been seeing for some reason the number 44 everywhere and I don't know why, but it's intensified over the last year. She kept asking, are you seeing it too? And as I've shared before, I always see 144, which reminds me of the 144,000, just a reminder that that's the time we're entering into. But what's so funny is right after I read this from her, I went into Walmart and I made some purchases. And when my receipt printed out, I looked down and my total was $44.44. I just started laughing. I don't believe in coincidences, so I definitely wanted just to put that out there. So our friend shared an article about Queen Elizabeth, Prince Charles, Prince William, and Prince George appearing in a rare new portrait. She says, I'm not sure why, but this stood out to me. The other day, the four of them were in a video making cookies together. It seems like they're making an extra effort to point out who is in line to the throne. And of course, as we're going back and forth with these screenshots, we're seeing 113 and 144 all over the place. It's just crazy, which always reminds me of family history, the 144,000, the 12 tribes, Ephraim. So then I brought up the Queen's message that she delivered over the Christmas holiday, and how in her video it showed her sitting at a table and there were pictures of Prince William and his family, her father and her husband, and all the other royals were missing. And so the media just took to that and said, she's clearly making a point about Meghan and Harry and all of that, right? But my friends pointed out that no, actually, it looks like she's trying to emphasize who's in line for the throne. And so our friend said the interesting thing with the Queen's display of pictures is that she made sure they were those in succession, her father and her husband. There's none of her other kids or grandkids either. I don't think she was specifically trying to send a message just about Harry and Meghan. But it does seem that they are trying to focus and tighten the brand of the royals around the succeeding monarchs, Charles, Will, and George. I read something the other day where she is slowly giving more and more duties to Charles. They've also, in the last few years, worked really hard to soften his image and help the public like him better, publishing pictures of him with grandkids, etc. I've watched some documentaries on him and I'm not a fan. She said he's also a supporter of a one world religion and the Muslim faith, and he's not a fan of Christianity. I've seen a lot of Brits upset that he is going to be the head of the Church of England when he clearly doesn't even believe in it. And his biggest cause to support is global warming, which my observation has been a front by those on the far left to create regulations to help take away freedoms. So she says, I think the things that we are seeing is that the Queen is trying to direct everyone's attention away from all the scandals and the drama that's been coming up in the royal family lately, and instead put the focus towards Charles and William. So our friend said, the other day I was listening to some commentary on the book of Revelations while I was restudying the last part of Come Follow Me, when the scriptures were talking about the woman who was arrayed in scarlet and purple, who represented Babylon and the materialism and lusts of the world. I kept seeing the image that Beth posted of Meghan dressed in purple and red. I'm not implying that she is that woman, rather that maybe what she stands for is symbolic of that. The royals are incredibly privileged people, no doubt, but Meghan has really taken that to a new level with her love of fashion and celebrity life. That rubs many people the wrong way because unlike celebrities, the royals are funded by the taxpayer. British people are good, hardworking people that give a good portion of their paycheck to the government. Most of them don't live the lives of abundance, and to see a person, an American nonetheless, come in and try to change things up, rebels against tradition, flaunts very costly apparel, and works hard to keep her family very private, all while being funded by the people, I think is what has led to her and Harry becoming unpopular. When they decided to split the foundation and not work with William and Kate anymore, that also upset many because the royal family should be as united as they can be for the sake of the country. And what's interesting is when the Queen was delivering that message over Christmas, it was all about unity. She was talking about putting our differences aside and coming together. And so it was interesting that she was saying that almost as if it's not only a reference to the nation, but to her own family. That is what good leaders and monarchs do out of duty. They do what is best for the country they represent and their people above their own personal agenda and desires. But maybe it's a good thing that they split. Meghan and Harry promote a lot of things that liberals promote. They even did a big support of Pride Month. I don't think they would be able to do that if they were still connected to William and Kate. I feel sorry for the Queen. Although imperfect, I believe she has tried hard to be a good monarch. She is very loved by the people. It's sad so much drama is happening now during her old age. I guess there is always drama, but maybe to a different level now. Then, of course, right after I recorded this video, the bombshell news broke of Meghan and Harry leaving behind their royal duties and moving to Canada. And this has created quite the firestorm, especially in the media. Speaking of the book of Revelation and the woman wearing red and purple who rides the beast, now earlier in the year we talked about this in a video message where we shared an image of Megan wearing red and purple and how we connected that to the book of Revelation. Here again is a screenshot that our friend came across right after I recorded this video that shows that image of Megan wearing red and purple. And this is the image they used for a fresh news story. It's almost as though this is symbolic of the beast dividing up the family. There really is just such a theme of division. Many also believe that they were already in the process of being forced out, and they chose to do it on their own terms so that they could control the narrative. But clearly there's a lot going on behind the scenes that we don't know about. Anyways, as she was talking about red and purple, it reminded me of my recent video where I talked about the Pope and the book of Revelation and the woman who wears scarlet and purple, and how those are the two colors of hierarchy in the Catholic Church. And anyways, I'm not going to rehash all of that. But all of a sudden, this story came out over the Christmas break, and my husband was the first to show it to me. And it was a story, I'm sure you've all seen it by now, it made world headlines, of the Pope walking through a crowd, and he's smiling and waving and talking to people, and a woman reaches out and grabs his hand, and all of a sudden he just looks at her so angry, and he gets so upset with her, and he just starts slapping her hand and pulls it away, and then stomps off, huffing and puffing, and the people were saying, you know, that wasn't very Christ-like. That's not what Jesus would have done. You're supposed to be a representative of the Lord, but you're acting very un-Christ-like. And a lot of people were saying, this is showing his true colors. This is who he really is. And a lot of these news articles replayed that video montage that I referenced several videos ago, of where people are lined up to greet him, and when they try to kiss his hand, he pulls it away, and he pushes them away, and he's smiling. He's trying to be positive and happy and show a good image, but at the same time he's brushing people away and pulling his hand away. So his body language is contradicting his smile on his face, and it's just person after person after person. They just keep getting dissed by the Pope. And so people have pointed that out before, that he's not very loving, not very caring, and not like the popes before him. But he will only let certain people kiss his hand, and people of a certain status or celebrities. And I guess kissing the Pope's hand is symbolic of being in the presence of the Lord. That's what I've been hearing. So anyways, it just reminded me of that. It's just funny how all these things I brought up in my videos keep showing up in the news. Also around this time was this news article. 90% of the Vatican's main charity reportedly is not going to the poor. And according to a correspondent from the Vatican, he has said that as little as 10% is actually spent on charitable works. I thought this part was very fascinating in the article. It says the Vatican finances have been a disaster for a long time, said Father Murray. That was part of what got the current Pope elected. He said he was going to reform the corruption in the Vatican. It hasn't happened. And it's a big cause of concern. Lots and lots of questions. Now in the last video message I mentioned, which I now understand the plural word for octopus is octopi. So I mentioned that in my last video, how I was seeing those everywhere. And someone sent me a picture that had just been in the news after my video message. Here's a screenshot of that. It's interesting because it's a picture of an octopus trying to entangle an eagle with his tentacles, and then the eagle is freed. But this happens on a farm, and I think that's very symbolic. There is a lot of symbolism in that image. I had just been talking about the tentacles of the deep state, of the adversary, getting his tentacles all over everything, and trying to bring down this nation, trying to bring down the gospel, trying to bring down the church. Here you have this eagle that represents America. I talked about in that video how the octopus represented the deep state, as shown on a Glenn Beck episode. Here you have these tentacles, the deep state, trying to entangle America, but America breaks free. And so I thought that was really neat. I just wanted to share that. But to take it a step further, They were fishermen that rescued the eagle. Now, what do fishermen represent? Fishers of men, Christian missionaries, or in other words, Christians. So if you replace those words in this news headline, it would say, Christians save America from the clutches of the deep state. And when I think of saving America, I think of saving the Constitution. Now, as you can see, this news story was released on December the 13th, which happened to be Friday the 13th. So just what else was happening on Friday the 13th of December? The House impeached the President of the United States, which many believe is a deep state operation. The left and the deep state are trying to take down America and take down the Constitution. But even though the deep state has its tentacles all over America, trying to bring death to America, fishermen or Christians intervene and rescue America. Right around this time, someone happened to post this image of a crow riding on an eagle's back. Now, I did a little bit of research and found out that this picture is from July 2015. So I went and looked at what events were going on in America in July of 2015, and I discovered that that was the month when South Carolina removed the Confederate flag from its state house. And then also that was when the Boy Scouts of America, for the first time ever, began to allow gay adult leaders. So even though these pictures were taken in July of 2015, it was very interesting that they were reposted on Facebook right around the same time of this other eagle news story. So what is the symbolism behind this? Here's some interpretations that I wanted to share. Someone said, the eagle, of course, is America, and the crow represents encroaching darkness, or the evil that doesn't even bother to try to hide anymore. The fact that the crow doesn't harass the eagle, and the eagle didn't seem to mind, so they didn't do the normal behaviors, makes me think that we as a country are embracing it, like the Nephites embraced the Gadiantans. This perspective was fascinating. It says, crows and ravens are closely associated with Native American culture. Do a search on the meaning of crows in Native American cultures and you might get another interpretation. If the Heartland model is correct, and the Hopewell people are the Nephites and Lamanites, then it's possible that this picture could also represent a unifying of God's people. So I did a search and this is what I found. It says, seeing a crow was and still is considered good luck by many tribes. The intelligence of crows is usually portrayed as their most important feature. And someone else points out, this crow is mounted up on eagle's wings, like the Isaiah scripture, which is where we want to be. It's interesting that this story first surfaced right around the 4th of July here in America. Anyways, I don't know about you, but I really feel like right now time is just flying, and it just feels like there's never enough time. New Year's Eve went by way too fast. It's like we ate dinner and all of a sudden the ball was dropping at midnight. There just seemed to be no time in between. Every year it seems that it always has dragged out and we keep looking at our watch like, oh, we still have a couple more hours till midnight. This is taking forever. But no, this last New Year's, it was way too quick. And every day following that, it's like I wake up and all of a sudden it's time to go to bed. And it's like, where does the day go? And I'm constantly busy. My to-do list just continues to grow. And it just feels like I'm always trying to fit so much in, but I can't. And I'm cutting a lot of things out so that I can do things that I feel are more important, but it still feels like I don't have enough time. So it's crazy how time really feels like it's speeding up. And I feel super busy all the time. Something else I wanted to point out was that the year 2020 started off with the 77th Annual Golden Globe Awards, which is something I never watch. I never watch any of the award shows. But one night as I was cleaning out the pantry, it was late at night and I was organizing things and I was high up on a shelf. I had my phone in the other room and I had my AirPods in. And so YouTube was just randomly popping up one video after another. And all of a sudden, all these Golden Globe videos started coming up. So I just listened to them. And it was really interesting. It got me thinking about some things. So a lot of these were the speeches of the celebrities who were receiving the awards. And in a lot of their thank you speeches, I heard things like this. They brought up Australia and that their hearts go out to Australia and the animals. So they were showing compassion for animals and the planet. There was a lot of talk about climate change and the planet. So again, just lots of compassion when it comes to animals and the planet. But then all of a sudden, a certain celebrity gets up and talks about pro-abortion. And I couldn't believe my ears what I was hearing. She gives a tearful story of how if she didn't have the opportunity to choose, she wouldn't be able to have her family and her career the way that it is, and that she was so grateful for the ability and the right to choose so that she could plan her family how she wanted it and when she wanted it, so that she could have the kind of career that she has. And so people were just all responding to that as I read the comments later, and they were just saying, wow, so she's getting up and talking about how grateful she was to abort her babies so that she could have a career and have this life of fame and fortune and prestige. And I watched the video again, and there were all these women in the room who were listening, and a lot of them were crying and cheering. And anyways, that's always the message of Hollywood, is all of this pro-liberal agenda. So they had Ricky Gervais host the award show, and of course his humor is very vulgar usually, so I don't listen to him, but in there it was like a roast. He roasted everybody in the room, and so that's what I heard in my mind, is this is like a roast. It's a Hollywood roast. In fact, look at this screenshot. There's my pay attention number, 311, pay attention. And the title of this YouTube video is Ricky Gervais uses Golden Globes monologue to roast all things Hollywood. And he absolutely did. He completely ripped Hollywood apart, and they were not too pleased with his jokes or his performance. And I started thinking about how all the ratings for all of these award shows continue to drop every year because America just isn't interested anymore with Hollywood because they feel so out of touch with reality, and we're completely on a different page with them. And so people really don't care what they think and what their opinions are and what they're promoting, and people are just so turned off by all of that, they just don't watch it anymore, they don't support it. So others continue to get up, and instead of just saying thank you for the award and talking about their career, they all chose to talk and promote leftist political views. I looked down on her video, Michelle's video, and there were 1,500 likes at that time, but 2.1 thousand who disliked it. So I thought this was a reflection of America. A significantly larger portion of Americans disagree with this message. They disagree with this thinking. They disagree with these views. These are not their values. And after reading all the comments, it was clear that everybody disagreed with what she shared. And that's what Americans really think. So as I got thinking about this Hollywood roast, I started thinking of Hollywood burning, roasting, burning. And then I saw that right around this time, here's a screenshot, there were fires burning in the Hollywood Hills. So again, symbolic of Hollywood is burning. So they have compassion for the planet and for animals, but not for human life, not for their own kind. So speaking of Australia and the fires that have been happening there that have been engulfing the whole entire country, the whole entire continent, it's interesting, I just want to share this here. The news continued to report that as the death toll was rising, there was no rain in sight, and not even in the forecast. Then I came across this on Facebook that says that Australia and New Zealand and the surrounding areas, the members of the church in those areas were being asked to fast for rain for Australia for that coming Sunday. There was even an article about it here on LDSliving.com. And I think you know what happened within less than 24 hours of this fast. Shari from Australia, where we are experiencing unprecedented fires over 5 states in this country, I want to thank you for all your prayers for rain and well-being during this time. On the weekend, we actually got rain. That's how quick fasting works. Just within a day, they got rain. Totally not in the forecast. It is not enough to put out the fires, which are still raging, but it was enough to dampen their ferocity, give firefighters and locals a breath, and regain hope. Just to give you an idea of how incredible this is, we are in absolute drought over our country, and the rain fell in numerous states. So thank you. I know the power of prayer and seeing it so. Thank you. And of course, since then, as of yesterday, they've had lots of rain coming down. So they've experienced some miracles. I just love how all the saints of the church in those areas in Australia and New Zealand joined together in a fast. And within less than 24 hours, the rains came. So this is the true power of miracles. Fasting works. And it happens fast. Maybe that's why it's called fasting or a fast, because it brings about miracles quickly. At least that's been my experience. So as you know, I'm a firm believer that everything that happens in the physical is a manifestation of what's taking place in the spiritual. So what kind of things have been going on in the country of Australia leading up to these fires? Well, I did a search and I found this. Australian state passes bill allowing abortions up to birth. Pro-abortion politicians hug and cheer. So we've seen how this has played out in our own country. I've done videos on this of what has happened with the weather and crazy things going on in our own country when these type of bills have been passed. So this happened on September 26, 2019. So I clicked on the article and it said that abortion activists tried to ram through the radical pro-abortion bill quickly. The bill passed the lower house of Parliament in August, just days after pro-abortion lawmakers introduced it. So this happened very quickly, and it actually started happening in August, preceding the fires. As you can see here, the Australian fires started in September of 2019, so right after this happened. We see a pattern when there's this magnitude of evil and wickedness, it's always followed by destruction. And just a couple more things I found in a quick search is that the Prime Minister of Australia belongs to the Liberal Party of Australia, which from what I understand is actually a right-center party. So they're semi-conservative. And in 2019, Australia had a federal election for Parliament, which according to news sources was said to be a very contentious election. And here's some more that I discovered from Prime Minister Morrison since first taking office in 2018. In October 2018, he announced that Australia was actually reviewing whether or not to move Australia's embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And they recognized that Jerusalem was the capital of Israel. However, just a year prior, Morrison was an opponent of legalizing same-sex marriage. And he also proposed an amendment to the marriage amendment allowing parents to remove children from class if non-traditional marriage is discussed. His amendment, however, failed and he refused to vote on the final bill. So clearly there has been a battle of left versus right policies in Australia. And though the Prime Minister is not for abortion, he has decided to stay out of the debates. So while we have Hollywood sending their sympathy and condolences to Australia because of the wildfires and expressing their compassion for the animals and the planet, at the same time, on the same evening, at the same award show, they're also expressing their support for abortion, showing no sympathy for human life. So as I looked into the rain forecast for Australia, I discovered that Tropical Cyclone Blake was on its way. And you know what's interesting? The meaning of the name Blake means light and it also means dark. It means black and it also means pale. That contrast is so interesting. That black and white reminds me of many things. It reminds me of the yin-yang, which is black and white, which is dualism, which is a big part of New Age philosophies. It also reminds me of God's laws, that they are black and white. There is no gray, there is no middle. You're either on one side or you're on the other. And furthermore, when I looked up the definition of Blake and I saw that it said black and pale, immediately I thought of the book of Revelation. I thought of the black horse and the pale horse prophecy. The black horse has always been understood to represent famine, usually due to drought, which we know has been taking place in Australia for quite a while now. And the pale horse is said to represent having power over famine, plague, and to kill by the sword. When I heard that, I was reminded of this screenshot that I just took. It says 2020, the year of the sword. Now, the sword often represents war and death, but you know what? When I hear the word sword, I often think of the Word of God. It's as powerful as a two-edged sword. So in reference to black and white and having two sides, the left and the right, the light and the dark, I'm thinking of the year of the sword, meaning the year of wars and contentions, and also the year of the Word of God going out. And of course, if the Lord is going to up his work, you know that Satan's going to be working just as hard to counteract that with the sword. So John said that death sat upon the pale horse, and unto him was given power over the fourth of the earth to kill with the sword, and with hunger, and with death, and by the beasts of the earth. So as God uses his two-edged sword, which is his word, you can see the adversary using his sword, which is for death. So you have life versus death, the dark versus the light. And that's definitely being manifested in the physical right now. Anyways, you guys, I am so excited for this new year. I really wake up every day with a big smile on my face and all of this motivation to start my day and just get as much done as I can. And I've been reading Sister Nelson's book, The Heavens Are Open, which is interesting because they made reference to that at the end of the last General Conference, and that stood out in my mind. The heavens are open, the heavens are open. They've repeated that a couple of times now. They've really been emphasizing that in conference. I think they're trying to tell us something. And they talked about it in reference to this upcoming General Conference, that the heavens are open, rejoice. And then she releases a book called The Heavens Are Open. So I thought, I've got to read that book because clearly they're trying to tell us something. So I've just been loving it. And in there, as I was reading it last night, she talked a lot about family history and how one day that finally became important to her and it never was before. And she said when it finally became important to her, just within minutes and hours and days, all of a sudden things just opened up for her and records fell into her lap and names came to mind and she had dreams and all kinds of exciting things. So she was able to find hundreds of names of her family. And as I was listening to that, I thought, how cool would that be? I'd love to start doing more family history, even more, and have those kinds of experiences where names just come to mind and records open up. And all of a sudden, I checked my email last night and I get an email from the Church Family History website that says that all these new records from Germany just opened up. Okay, that's where my husband is from, and we have not been able to find anything. We have so many dead ends. We can only go back about 5 generations on both sides of his tree. So I was so excited when I saw that after just reading Wendy's book last night. Well, then at about 6 o'clock this morning, I hear a name in my dream, a first name and a last name. And this has happened to me once before. And I heard a voice in my dream say, get up and write this down right now so you don't forget. So all of a sudden I open my eyes, I wake up, and I go write that name down. So I'm going to go investigate that later. But I have another name from a few years ago from another dream that I had where I saw on a family history website on my computer a name that could be one of my ancestors. So I'm still looking into that. Anyway, so I'm super excited for this year, and I'm super excited to just engage more and more in this work, to do more family history and achieve a lot of these goals that we've set as a family and that I've set personally, and study the Book of Mormon, and just, I don't know, I feel so optimistic and so excited. I hope you feel that way as well. Anyways, thank you so much for joining me today, you guys. I hope you have a wonderful day. I hope you have a wonderful week, and I will see you next time.